Click the link in the description to sign up for a free 30-day Audible trial.
Section 1 of the Communist Manifesto. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording is by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Manifesto of the Communist Party by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. All the powers of old Europe have entered into a holy alliance to exorcise this spectre. Pope and Tsar, Metternich and Guizot, French radicals and German police spies. Where is the party in opposition that has not been decried as communistic by its opponents in power? Where is the opposition that has not hurled back the branding reproach of communism against the more advanced opposition parties, as well as against its reactionary adversaries? Two things result from this fact. 1. Communism is already acknowledged by all European powers to be itself a power. 2. It is high time that Communists should openly, in the face of the whole world, publish their views, their aims, their tendencies, and meet this nursery tale of the spectre of communism with a manifesto of the party itself. To this end, Communists of various nationalities have assembled in London and sketched the following manifesto, to be published in the English, French, German, Italian, Flemish, and Danish languages. Section 1. Bourgeois and Proletarians. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman, in a word, oppressor and oppressed, stood in constant opposition to one another, carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight, a fight that each time ended either in a revolutionary reconstitution of society at large or in the common ruin of the contending classes. In the earlier epochs of history, we find almost everywhere a complicated arrangement of society into various orders, a manifold gradation of social rank. In ancient Rome we have patricians, knights, plebeians, slaves. In the Middle Ages, feudal lords, vassals, guildmasters, journeymen, apprentices, serfs. In almost all of these classes, again, subordinate gradations. The modern bourgeois society that has sprouted from the ruins of feudal society has not done away with class antagonisms. It has but established new classes, new conditions of oppression, new forms of struggle in place of the old ones. Our epoch, the epoch of the bourgeoisie, possesses, however, this distinctive feature. It has simplified the class antagonisms. Society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, bourgeoisie and proletariat. From the serfs of the Middle Ages sprang the chartered burghers of the earliest towns. From these burgesses the first elements of the bourgeoisie were developed. The discovery of America, the rounding of the Cape, opened up fresh ground for the rising bourgeoisie. The East Indian and Chinese markets, the colonization of America, trade with the colonies, the increase in the means of exchange and in commodities generally, gave to commerce, to navigation, to industry, an impulse never before known, and thereby, to the revolutionary element in the tottering feudal society, a rapid development. The feudal system of industry, under which industrial production was monopolized by closed guilds, now no longer sufficed for the growing wants of the new markets. The manufacturing system took its place. The guildmasters were pushed on one side by the manufacturing middle class. Division of labor between the different corporate guilds vanished in the face of division of labor in each single workshop. Meantime, the markets kept ever growing, the demand ever rising. Even manufacture no longer sufficed. Thereupon steam and machinery revolutionized industrial production. The place of manufacture was taken by the giant, modern industry, the place of the industrial middle class, by industrial millionaires, the leaders of whole industrial armies, the modern bourgeois. Modern industry has established the world market, for which the discovery of America paved the way. This market has given an immense development to commerce, to navigation, to communication by land. This development has, in its time, reacted on the extension of industry, and in proportion as industry, commerce, navigation, railways extended, in the same proportion the bourgeoisie developed, increased its capital, and pushed into the background every class handed down from the Middle Ages. We see therefore how the modern bourgeoisie is itself the product of a long course of development, of a series of revolutions in the modes of production and of exchange. Each step in the development of the bourgeoisie was accompanied by a corresponding political advance of that class. An oppressed class under the sway of the feudal nobility, an armed and self-governing association in the medieval commune, here independent urban republic, as in Italy and Germany, there taxable third estate of the monarchy, as in France, afterwards, in the period of manufacture proper, serving either the semi-feudal or the absolute monarchy as a counterpoise against the nobility, and in fact, corner-stone of the great monarchies in general, the bourgeoisie has at last, since the establishment of modern industry and of the world market, conquered for itself, in the modern representative state, exclusive political sway. The executive of the modern state is but a committee for managing the common affairs of the whole bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie historically has played a most revolutionary part. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism, in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and indefeasible chartered freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up to with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science, into its paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil, and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionists so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders, far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguished the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new-formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has through its exploitation of the world market given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country. To the great chagrin of reactionists, it has drawn from under the feet of industry the national ground on which it stood. All old established national industries have been destroyed, or are daily being destroyed. They are dislodged by new industries, whose introduction becomes a life and death question for all civilized nations, by industries that no longer work up indigenous raw material, but raw material drawn from the remotest zones. Industries whose products are consumed, not only at home, but in every quarter of the globe. In place of the old wants, satisfied by the productions of the country, we find new wants, requiring for their satisfaction the products of distant lands and climes. In place of the old local and national seclusion and self-sufficiency, we have intercourse in every direction, universal interdependence of nations. And as in material, so also in intellectual production. The intellectual creations of individual nations become common property. National one-sidedness and narrow-mindedness become more and more impossible, and from the numerous national and local literatures there arises a world literature. The bourgeoisie, by the rapid improvement of all instruments of production, by the immensely facilitated means of communication, draws all, even the most barbarian nations Section
into
1 of the
civilization.
Communist Manifesto.
The cheap prices of
This
its
is a
commodities are
LibriVox
the
recording.
heavy artillery
All
with which
LibriVox
it
recordings are in the
batters
public
down all
domain.
Chinese walls,
For more information
with which
or
it
to
forces
volunteer,
the barbarians'
please visit
intensely obstinate hatred
LibriVox.org.
of foreigners to capitulate.
This recording is by Mark
It
Smith of
compels all
Simpsonville,
nations,
South Carolina.
on pain of extinction,
Manifesto
to adopt
of the
bourgeois
Communist
mode
Party
of production.
by Karl
It
Marx and
compels them
Friedrich
to
Engels.
introduce what it calls civilization into their midst.
A specter
i.e.,
is haunting
to
Europe,
become
the
bourgeois
specter
themselves.
of communism.
In one
All
word,
the powers of
it
old Europe
creates a
have entered
world
into a
after
holy
its own
alliance to
image.
exorcise this specter. The
Pope
bourgeoisie
and
has
Tsar
subjected the
Metternich
country to
and
the
Guizot,
Guizot,
towns.
French radicals,
It has
and German
created
police
enormous
spies.
cities, has greatly
Where is the party
increased
in
the
opposition
urban
that has
population
not
as
been
compared
decried
with
as
the rural,
communistic by its
and has
opponents
thus
in power?
rescued a considerable
Where is
part
the
of
opposition that
population
has
from
not
the
hurled back
idiocy
the
of
branding
rural
reproach
life?
of communism
Just as it has
against
made
the
the
more
country
advanced
dependent on the
opposition
towns,
parties,
so
as
it has
well as
made
against its
barbarian and
reactionary
semi-barbarian
adversaries?
countries
Two
dependent on the
things result from
civilized
this
ones.
fact.
Nations
1.
of peasants
Communism
on nations
is
of
already
bourgeois,
acknowledged by
the
all
East
European
on the
powers
West.
to be itself a
The
power.
bourgeoisie keeps more
2.
and more doing away
It
with
is
the
high
scattered
time that
state of the
communists
population,
should
of the
openly,
means
in the
of
face of the
production,
whole world,
and of property.
publish their views,
It has
their aims,
agglomerated
their
production,
tendencies,
and has
meet this
concentrated property
nursery
in a few
tale of the
hands.
specter of
The
communism
natural
with a
consequence
manifesto
of
of the
this
party
political
itself.
centralization.
To this end,
Independent,
communists
or but
of
loosely
various
connected
nationalities
provinces,
have assembled
with
in
separate
London
interests,
and sketched
laws,
the following
governments,
manifesto,
and
to
systems
be
of
published into
taxation,
English, French,
became
German,
lumped together
Italian,
into one
Flemish,
nation,
and Danish
with one
languages.
government, one code of laws,
Section
one
1.
national class interest,
Bourgeois and
one
proletarians.
frontier and one customs tariff.
The history of all
bourgeoisie,
hitherto
during
existing
its rule of
societies
scarce
is the
100
history of
years,
class
has
struggles.
created more massive
Freeman
and
and
more
slave,
colossal productive
patrician and
forces
plebeian,
than have all
lord and
preceding
serf,
generations
guild
together.
master and journeyman,
Subjection
in a
of
word,
nature's forces
oppressor
to man,
and oppressed,
machinery,
stood in constant
application of
opposition to
chemistry
one
to
another,
industry and
carried on
agriculture,
an uninterrupted,
navigation,
now hidden,
railways,
now open
electric
fight,
telegraphs,
a fight that each time
clearing of
ended
whole
either in
continents
a
for
revolutionary
cultivation,
reconstitution of
canalization
society
of
at
rivers,
large,
whole
or in the
populations
common ruin of
conjured
the
out of the
contending
ground.
classes.
What earlier century
In the
had
earlier
even a
epics of
presentiment
history,
that such
we find
productive
almost
forces
everywhere a
slumbered in the lap of
complicated
social
arrangement
labor?
of society into
We
various
see
orders,
then the means
a
of
manifold
production and of
gradation of
exchange,
social rank.
on whose
In
foundation the
ancient
bourgeoisie
Rome, we
built
have
itself
patricians,
up,
knights,
were generated
plebeians,
in feudal
slaves.
society.
In the Middle
At
Ages,
a certain stage
feudal
in the
lords,
development of these
vassals,
means of production
guild
and of
masters,
exchange,
journeymen,
the conditions
apprentices,
under which feudal
serfs.
society produced
In almost
and
all of these
exchanged,
classes,
the feudal
again,
organization
subordinate
of agriculture
gradations.
and manufacturing industry.
The modern bourgeois
in one
society
word,
that has
the
sprouted
feudal
from the
relations
ruins of feudal
property
society
became
has
no
not
longer
done away with
compatible
class
with the already
antagonisms.
developed productive
It has but
forces.
established
They
new
became
classes,
so
new
many
conditions
fetters.
of oppression,
They had
new
to be
forms
burst
of struggle
asunder.
in place of the
They
old
were
ones.
burst asunder.
Our epoch, the epic of
Into
the
their place
bourgeoisie,
stepped free
possesses,
competition,
however, this
accompanied by a
distinctive
social
feature.
and political
It
constitution
has simplified the
adapted
class
to it,
antagonisms.
and by the economical
Society
and
as a
political
whole is
sway of
more
the
and
bourgeois
more
class.
splitting up into two great
A
hostile
similar
camps,
movement is
into
going
two
on
great
before
classes,
our own eyes.
directly facing
Modern
each other,
bourgeois society,
bourgeoisie
with its relations
and
of
proletariat.
production, of exchange, and of
From the
property,
serfs of the Middle
a
Ages
society
sprang
that
the
has
chartered
conjured up
burghers
such
of the earliest
gigantic means
towns.
of production
From
and of
these
exchange,
burgesses, the
is
first
like
elements of the
sorcerer,
bourgeoisie
who is
were
no
developed.
longer able to control the
The
powers
discovery
of
of
the
America,
netherworld, whom
the
he has
rounding of
called
the
up
Cape,
by his
opened up
spells.
fresh ground
For
for the
many a
rising
decade
bourgeoisie.
past, the history of
The
industry
East
and
Indian
commerce
and
is
Chinese
but the history
markets,
of the revolt
the colonization
of
of
modern
America,
forces
trade with the
against modern
colonies,
conditions
the
of
increase
production,
in the means of
against
exchange
the
and in
property
commodities
relations that are
generally,
the conditions
gave to
for the
commerce,
existence
to
of the
navigation,
bourgeoisie
to
and of
industry,
its rule.
an impulse
It
never
is enough
before
to
known,
mention the
and
commercial
thereby
crises
to the
that by their
revolutionary
periodical
element in the
return
tottering
put on
feudal
its trial,
society
each
a
time
rapid
more
development.
threateningly, the
feudal
existence
system of
the entire
industry,
bourgeois society.
under which industrial
In
production
these
was
crises, a
monopolized
great
by
part
closed
not
guilds,
only of the existing
now no
products,
longer
but
sufficed
also
for the
of the
growing
previously
wants of the
created
new markets.
productive forces,
The
are
manufacturing
periodically
system took its
destroyed.
place. The guild
In these
masters were
crises,
pushed on
there
one
breaks
side
out
by
an
the
epidemic
manufacturing
that,
middle class.
in all earlier
Division of
epochs,
labor between
would
the
have
different
seemed an
corporate
absurdity.
guilds vanished
The
in the
epidemic
face
of
of division of labor
overproduction.
in each single
Society
workshop.
suddenly finds itself
Meantime,
put back
the
into a
markets
state
kept
of
ever
momentary
growing, the
barbarism.
demand ever
It
rising.
appears as if a famine,
Even
a
manufacture no
universal
longer
war of
sufficed.
devastation, had cut
Thereupon,
off the
steam
supply
and
of every
machinery
means of
revolutionized
subsistence.
industrial production.
Industry and commerce
The
seemed to be
place of
destroyed.
manufacture was
And
taken
why?
by the giant
Because
modern
there is
industry.
too much
The place of the
civilization,
industrial middle class.
too much
by
means of
industrial
subsistence,
millionaires.
too much
the leaders
industry,
of whole industrial
too much
armies.
commerce.
The modern bourgeois.
The productive forces at the
Modern
disposal of
industry has
society no
established
longer
the world
tend to
market
further the
for which the
development
discovery
of
of
the conditions
America
of bourgeois
paved the
property.
way. This
On the
market has
contrary,
given an immense
they have become
development
too
to commerce,
powerful for
to
these
navigation,
conditions,
to
by which they
communication
are
by
fettered.
land.
And so
This
soon as they
development
overcome
has,
these
in
fetters,
its time,
they bring
reacted
disorder
on the
into the
extension
whole
of
of
industry,
bourgeois society,
and in proportion as
endanger the
industry,
existence of bourgeois
commerce,
property.
navigation,
The
railways
conditions of
extended,
bourgeois society
in the
are
same
too
proportion
narrow to
the bourgeoisie
comprise the wealth
developed,
created by
increased
them.
its capital,
And how does the
pushed
bourgeoisie
into the
get over these
background every
crises?
class handed down
On the
from
one
the Middle
hand,
Ages.
enforced destruction of
We
a
see
mass
therefore
of
how the
productive
modern
forces,
bourgeoisie
on
is
the
itself
other,
the
by the
product of a
conquest
long
of new
course of
markets,
development,
and by
of
the
a
more
series
thorough
of revolutions in
exploitation
the
of the
modes
old
of
ones.
production
That
and of
is to say,
exchange.
by paving
Each
the way
step
for
in
more
the development of the
extensive and more
bourgeoisie was
destructive
accompanied by
crises,
a
and by
corresponding
diminishing the means
advance
whereby
of that
crises
class.
are
An
prevented.
oppressed class under the
The
sway of the
weapons with
feudal
which the
nobility,
bourgeoisie
an
felled
armed and
feudalism to the
self-governing
ground,
association
are now
in the
turned against
medieval
the
commune.
bourgeoisie itself.
Here, independent urban
But
republic,
not only has
as
the
in
bourgeoisie
Italy and
forged
Germany,
the weapons that
their
bring death to
taxable
itself,
third estate of
it
the
is also
monarchy,
called into
as in
existence
France,
the men who are to
afterwards,
wield
in
these
the period of
weapons,
manufacture
the modern
proper,
working class,
serving either the
the
semi-feudal
proletarians.
or the absolute monarchy
In proportion
as a
as
the
against the
bourgeoisie,
nobility,
i.e.,
and in
capital,
fact,
is
cornerstone of the great
in the same
monarchies
proportion
in general,
is the proletariat.
the bourgeoisie
The modern
has at
working
last
class, since the
developed
establishment of
a
modern
class of
industry and of the
laborers
world
who
market,
live only so long as
conquered
they
for
find
itself,
work,
and
who
who
find
find
work only so long as their labor
exclusive
increases
political
capital.
sway.
These
The executive
laborers
of the
who
modern
must sell
state is
themselves
but a committee
piecemeal
for managing
are
the
a
common
commodity,
affairs of the
like
whole
every other article
bourgeoisie.
of commerce, and are
The bourgeoisie
consequently
historically
exposed to
has
all
played
the
a most
vicissitudes
revolutionary
of
part.
competition, to
The
all the
bourgeoisie,
fluctuations
wherever
of the
it has
market,
got the upper hand,
owing
has
to the
put an end
extensive
to
use
all
of
feudal,
machinery and to
patriarchal,
division of
idyllic
labor.
relations.
The work of the
It is
proletarians has
pitilessly
lost
torn
all
asunder the
individual
motley feudal
character,
ties that
and
bound man to
consequently
his
all
natural
charm
superiors,
for the workman.
and
He
is left
becomes an
remaining
appendage
no
of the
other nexus
machine,
between man
and it is only the
man
most simple,
than
most
naked
monotonous,
self-interest
and most
than
easily
callous
acquired knack
cash
that
payment.
is required of him.
It has drowned the
Hence,
most
the
heavenly
cost of
ecstasies
production of
of
a workman
religious
is
fervor,
restricted
of
almost
chivalrous
entirely
enthusiasm,
to the means of subsistence
Philistine
that he requires
sentimentalism,
for his maintenance,
in the icy
and for
water
the
of
propagation of his
egotistical
race.
calculation.
But the price
It
of
has
a
resolved
commodity,
personal
and
worth
therefore
into
also of
exchange
labor,
value,
is
and in
equal
place
to
of
its
the
cost of
numberless
production.
and indefeasible
In
chartered
proportion,
freedoms,
therefore,
has
as
set
the
up that
repulsiveness
single
of the work
unconscionable
increases,
freedom,
the wage
free trade.
decreases.
In one
Nay,
word,
more,
for
in
exploitation,
proportion as the use of
veiled by
machinery
religious
and
and
division of
political
labor
illusions,
increases,
naked,
in the same
shameless,
proportion,
direct, brutal
the burden of
exploitation
toil also increases.
The
Whether
bourgeoisie
by
has stripped of
prolongation
its
of the
halo
working hours,
every
by
occupation
increase of
hitherto
the work
honored and
exacted
looked up
in a
to
given
with reverent
time,
awe,
or by increased
it has
speed of
converted
the
the
machinery,
physician, the
etc.
lawyer, the priest, the poet,
Modern
the
industry
man of
has converted
science
the little
into its
workshop of the
paid-wage
patriarchal
laborer,
master into the great
The
factory
bourgeoisie
of the
has torn
industrial
away from the
capitalist.
family its sentimental
Masses
veil,
of laborers
and has
crowded
reduced
into
the
the
family
factory,
relation to a
are
mere
organized
money
like
relation.
soldiers.
As
The
bourgeoisie
bourgeoisie
has
has
disclosed
disclosed
how
how
it
it
came to
they are
pass
placed under
that
the
the brutal
command of a
display of
perfect
vigor in
hierarchy
the
of
Middle
officers
Ages,
and sergeants,
which reactionists
not
so
only
much
are they
admire,
slaves of the bourgeois
found its fitting
class
complement
and
in
of
the
the
most
bourgeois
slothful
state,
indolence.
they are daily and
It has been
hourly
the first to
enslaved
show
by the
what
machine,
man's activity
by the
can bring about.
overlooker, and above
It has
all,
accomplished
by
wonders,
the individual
far
bourgeois
surpassing
manufacturer
Egyptian
himself.
pyramids, Roman
The more
aqueducts,
openly this
and
despotism
Gothic
proclaims
cathedrals.
gain to be
It has
its end
conducted
and
expeditions
aim,
that put
more
in the
petty,
shade all
the more
former
hateful,
exoduses
and
of
more
nations and
embittering
crusades.
it is.
The bourgeoisie
the
cannot
skill and
exist
exertion
without
of strength
constantly
implied in
revolutionizing
manual
the
labor,
instruments
in other
of
words,
production.
The more
And
modern
thereby
industry
the
becomes
relations
developed,
of production,
the more is the
and with
labor
them
of
the
men
whole relations
superseded by
of
that
society.
of women.
Conservation of the
age
old
and sex
modes
have
of
no longer
production
any
in
distinctive
unaltered
social
form
validity
was,
for the
on the
working
contrary,
class.
the
All
first
are
condition of
instruments of
existence
labor,
for all earlier
more or less
industrial
expensive
classes.
to use, according to
Constant
their age and
revolutionizing
sex.
of production,
No sooner is the
uninterrupted
exploitation of the
disturbance
laborer
all
by the
social
manufacturer
so far
everlasting
at an
uncertainty
end that he
and
receives his
agitation
wages in cash,
distinguish the
that he
bourgeois
is set
epoch
upon
from
by
all
the other
earlier
portions of the
ones.
bourgeoisie,
All fixed,
the landlord,
fast
the
frozen
shopkeeper,
relations,
the pawnbroker,
with their
etc.
train of ancient and
The
venerable
lower strata of
prejudices
the
and
middle
opinions
class,
are
the small
swept away.
tradespeople, shopkeepers,
All new formed ones
retired
become
tradesmen generally,
antiquated before they
the
can
handicraftsmen and peasants.
All that is
All
solid
these
melts
sink
into
gradually
air.
into the
All that is
proletariat,
holy is
partly
profaned,
because their
and
diminutive
man is at
capital
last
does not
compelled to
suffice
face
for the
with sober
scale on which
senses
modern industry
his
is
real
carried on,
conditions of life,
and is swamped
and
in the
his relations
competition
with
with the
his
large
kind.
capitalists. Partly
The
because
need
their
of a
specialized
constantly
skill is
expanding
rendered
market
worthless
for its
by the new
products
methods of
chases
production.
the bourgeoisie over
Thus,
the
the
whole
proletariat
surface of
is
the globe.
recruited from all
It
classes
must
of the
nestle
population.
everywhere,
The
settle
proletariat
everywhere,
goes through various stages of
establish
development.
connections
With
everywhere.
its birth begins its
The
struggle with
bourgeoisie,
the
has, through its
At first,
exploitation
the
of the world
contest is
market,
carried on by
given a
individual laborers,
cosmopolitan character
then
to
by the
production
workpeople of a
and
factory,
consumption in
then by
every
the
country.
operatives of one trade,
To the great
in one
chagrin of
locality,
reactionists,
against the
it is
individual
drawn
bourgeois
from under the
who
feet of
directly
industry,
exploits
the
them.
national ground on
They
which
direct
it
their
stood.
attacks not against
All
the bourgeois
old
conditions of
established national
production,
industries
but
have been
against the
destroyed,
instruments of
or
production
are daily
themselves.
being destroyed.
They destroy imported
They are
wares that
dislodged
compete
by
with
new
their labor.
industries.
They
whose
smash to
introduction
pieces
becomes a
machinery.
life and death
They set
question for all
factories ablaze.
civilized nations.
They seek to restore by
industries
force
that no longer
the vanished
work up
status of the
indigenous
workmen
raw
of the Middle
material,
Ages.
but raw
At this
material
stage, the
drawn from the
laborers still form
remotest
an incoherent
zones.
mass, scattered
Industries
over the
whose
whole
products
country,
are consumed
and broken broken up by
not
their
only at
mutual
home,
competition.
but in every quarter of
If
the
anywhere
globe.
they unite to
In
form
place
more
of the old
compact
wants,
bodies,
satisfied by the productions of the
their own
country,
active union,
we find
but of
new
the union of the
wants,
bourgeoisie,
requiring for their
which
satisfaction the
class, in order
products
to
of
attain
distant
its own
lands
political
and
ends,
climes,
is
in
compelled to
place
set
of
the
the
whole
old local
proletariat
and
in
national
motion,
seclusion
and
and
is moreover yet,
self-sufficiency.
for a time,
We
able to
have
do so.
intercourse in every direction.
At this stage, therefore,
Universal
the proletarians
interdependence
do
of
not fight
nations,
their enemies,
and as
but
in
the enemies
material,
of their enemies,
so
the
also
remnants
in
of
intellectual
absolute monarchy,
production.
the
The
landowners,
intellectual
the
creations of
non-industrial
individual
bourgeois,
nations
the
become
petty bourgeoisie.
common property.
Thus, the whole
National
historical movement is
one-sidedness and
concentrated in the
narrow-mindedness
hands of the
become
bourgeoisie.
more and more
Every
impossible,
victory so obtained
and from
is
the
a victory
numerous
for
national
the
and local
bourgeoisie.
literatures, there
But with the
arises
development of
a
industry,
world
the
literature.
proletariat not only increases in
The
number,
bourgeoisie,
it
by
becomes
the rapid
concentrated in
improvement
greater
of all
masses.
instruments of
Its strength
production,
grows,
by the
and it
immensely
feels that strength
facilitated
more.
means of communication,
The various interests
draws
and
all,
conditions of life
even
within
the
the
most
ranks of the
barbarian
proletariat
nations
are
into
more and more
civilization.
equalized, in
The cheap
proportion
prices
as
of its
machinery
commodities are
obliterates
the
all
heavy
distinctions of
artillery
labor,
with which it
and nearly
batters down
everywhere
all Chinese
reduces
walls,
wages to the same
with which
low
it
level.
forces the barbarians'
The growing
intensely
competition
obstinate
among the
hatred
bourgeois
of foreigners
and the
to
resulting
capitulate.
commercial crises
It compels
make
all
the wages
nations,
of the workers
on
ever
pain of
more
extinction,
fluctuating.
to
The
adopt the
unceasing
bourgeois
improvement
mode of
of
production.
machinery, ever
It
more
compels
rapidly
them to
developing,
introduce what
makes
it
their
calls
livelihood
civilization
more and more
into their midst,
precarious.
i.e.,
The collisions
to
between
become
individual
bourgeois
workmen
themselves.
and individual bourgeois,
In one word,
take
it
more and
creates a
more the
world
character of
after its
collisions
own
between
image.
two classes. The
Thereupon
bourgeoisie
the
has
workers
subjected
begin
the
to form
country to the rule of the
combinations,
towns,
trade unions.
It has created
against
enormous
the
cities,
bourgeois.
has
They club
greatly
together in
increased
order
the
to
urban
keep up the rate
population
of
as
wages.
compared with the rural.
They found
and has
permanent
thus rescued a
associations
considerable
in order to
part
make
of the
provision
population from the
beforehand
idiocy
for
of
these
rural
occasional
life.
revolts.
Just as
Here
it has
and
made
there
the
the
country
contest breaks
dependent
out
on the
into
towns,
riots.
so it has made
Now and
barbarian
then the workers
and
are
semi-barbarian
victorious,
countries
but only
dependent
for a
on the
time.
civilized ones.
The real fruit of their
Nations of
battle
peasants
lies
on nations
not
of
in the
bourgeois,
immediate result,
the East,
but in
on
the
West.
ever-expanding union of the workers.
The bourgeoisie keeps
This
more and
union is
more
helped
doing
on
away
by
with
the
the scattered
means
state
of
of the
communication
population
that are created
of
by
the
means
modern
of
industry
production,
and
that
of
place the
property.
workers of different
It has
localities in
agglomerated
contact with
production
one another.
and has concentrated
It was
property
just this
in a few
contact that was
hands.
needed to
The
centralize
natural
the numerous
consequence
local
of this was
struggles,
political
all of the same
centralization,
character,
into
into
one
one
national
or but
struggle
loosely
between
connected
classes.
provinces.
But
With
every
separate
class struggle
interests,
is a
laws,
political struggle,
governments,
and
that
systems of
union,
taxation,
to attain which the
became lumped
burghers of the
together
Middle
into
Ages,
one nation,
with their miserable
with one government,
highways,
one
required
code of
centuries.
laws, one
The
national
modern
class
proletarians,
interest,
thanks to
one
railways,
frontier and one
achieve
customs
in a
tariff.
few years.
The bourgeoisie,
This organization
during
of
its
the
rule of
proletarians
scarce
into a
100
class,
years,
and
has created
consequently
more
into a
massive
political
and more
party,
colossal
is
productive
continually
forces
being
than
upset
have all
again by the
preceding
competition
generations
between the
together.
workers themselves.
Subjection
But
of
it ever
nature's
rises
forces
up
to
again,
man,
stronger,
machinery,
firmer,
application of
mightier.
chemistry to
It
industry and
compels
agriculture,
legislative
steam
recognition of
navigation,
particular interests
railways,
of the workers,
electric
by taking
telegraphs,
advantage of the
clearing
divisions
of whole
among the
continents
bourgeoisie
for cultivation,
itself. Thus the 10
canalization
hours
of
bill in
rivers,
England was
whole
carried.
populations conjured out
Altogether,
of the ground.
collisions between the
What
classes
earlier
of the old
century had
society
even a
further,
presentiment
in
that
many
such
ways,
productive forces
the course of
slumbered in
development
the lap
of the
social
proletariat.
labor? The
We
bourgeoisie
see then
finds
the
itself
means of
involved in a
production and of
constant
exchange,
battle, on
on
whose
first with the
foundation the
aristocracy,
bourgeoisie built itself
later
up,
on with those
were
portions of the
generated in
bourgeoisie
feudal
itself,
society, whose interests have
certain
become
stage in the
antagonistic to the
development of
progress
these
of
means
industry.
of production and
At
of
all
exchange,
times,
with the
conditions
bourgeoisie
under
of
which
foreign
feudal
countries.
society produced and
In all
exchanged,
these battles,
the
it
feudal
sees itself
organization of
compelled to appeal
agriculture
to the
and
proletariat,
manufacturing industry
to ask for its
in
help.
one word, and
The
thus
feudal
to
relations
drag
of
it into
property
the political arena
became no longer
the
compatible
bourgeoisie
with the
itself,
already
therefore,
developed productive
supplies the
forces.
proletariat
They
with its
became
own
so
instruments
many
of
fetters.
political and general
They had
education.
to be burst asunder.
In other words,
They were
it furnishes
burst
the
asunder.
proletariat with weapons for
Into
fighting
their
the
place
bourgeoisie.
stepped free competition.
Further,
accompanied
as we have
by a
already
social
seen,
and political
entire
constitution
sections of the
adapted
ruling
to
classes
it,
are,
and by the
economical
advance of
and
industry,
political sway of the bourgeois
precipitated
class
into the proletariat.
A
Or
similar
are at
movement
least
is
threatened
going
in
on
their new
before
conditions
our
of
own
existence.
eyes. These
Modern
also
bourgeois
supply the
society,
proletariat
with its
fresh
relations
elements
of
of
production,
enlightenment,
of
and progress,
exchange, and of property, Finally,
a society
in
that has
times when the
conjured up
class
such
struggle nears the
gigantic means
decisive
of production
hour,
and of
the
exchange,
process of dissolution
like the
going on
sorcerer
within the ruling
who
class,
is no longer able to
in
control
fact,
the
within the
powers
whole
of the
range of
nether world,
society,
whom he has called up
such
by
a
his
violent,
spells.
glaring character
For many a decade
that a small
past,
section of
the
the ruling
history of
class
industry and
cuts itself
commerce is
adrift
but the history
and
of the
joins
revolt
the
of modern
revolutionary
productive
class,
forces
the class that
against
holds
modern
the future in
conditions
its
of
hands.
production,
Just
against
as,
the property
therefore,
relations
at an earlier
that are
period,
the conditions
a section
for the
of the
existence
nobility
of the
went over to
bourgeoisie
the bourgeoisie,
and of its rule.
so now a
It is
portion
enough
of the
to mention the
bourgeoisie
commercial
goes over to the
crises
proletariat,
that by their
and in
periodical
particular,
return put on
a
its
portion
trial,
of the bourgeois
each time more
ideologists
threateningly,
who have raised
the
themselves to
existence
the
of the
level of
entire bourgeois
comprehending
society.
theoretically the
In these
historical
crises,
movement
a great
as
part,
a whole,
not only of the existing products,
of all the
but
classes
also
that
of the
stand
previously
face to
created
face with the
productive
bourgeoisie
forces,
today,
are
the
periodically
proletariat
destroyed.
alone is a
In
really
these
revolutionary
crises, there
class.
breaks out an epidemic
The other
that,
classes
in
decay and
all
finally
earlier
disappear in the
epochs,
face of
would
modern
have seemed
industry.
an absurdity.
The proletariat
The
is
epidemic
its special
of
and essential
overproduction.
product.
Society
The lower
suddenly
middle class,
finds itself
the
put
small
back into a
manufacturer,
state of
the
momentary
shopkeeper,
barbarism.
the artisan,
It
the
appears as if
peasant,
a famine,
all these
a
fight
universal
against the
war of
bourgeoisie
devastation,
to save
had
from
cut off the
extinction
supply
their
of every
existence
means
as
of
fractions
subsistence.
of the middle class.
Industry and commerce
They are
seem to be
therefore not
destroyed.
revolutionary,
And
but
why?
conservative.
Because
Nay,
there is
more,
too
they are
much
reactionary,
civilization,
for they try to
too
roll
much
back the
means
wheel
of
of history.
subsistence, too
If
much
by chance
industry,
they are revolutionary,
too much commerce.
they are so only in view
The
of their
productive forces at the
impending
disposal
transfer
of
into the
society no
proletariat.
longer tend to
They thus
further the
defend
development of the
not their
conditions of
present,
bourgeois
but their
property.
future interests.
On the
They
contrary,
desert their own
they have
standpoint
become
to
too
place themselves
powerful
at
for
that of
these
the
conditions,
proletariat.
by which they are
The
fettered,
dangerous
and so
class,
soon as they
the
overcome
social
these
scum,
fetters, they
that
bring
passively
disorder
rotting
into the
mass
whole
thrown
of
off by
bourgeois
the lowest
society,
layers of old
endanger
society,
the existence of
may,
bourgeois
here
property.
and there, be
The
swept into the
conditions of
movement
bourgeois
by a
society
proletarian
are
revolution.
too narrow to
Its
comprise the
conditions
wealth
of life,
created
however,
by them.
prepare it far
And
more
how does
for
the
the part of a
bourgeoisie get over
bribed
these
tool
crises?
of reactionary intrigue.
On the one hand, enforced
In the
destruction
conditions
of a
of the
mass of
proletariat,
productive forces,
those of old society
on the other,
at large
by
are
the
already
conquest of new
virtually
markets,
swamped.
and by the more
The
thorough
proletarian is without
exploitation of the
property.
old ones.
His relation
That
to his
is to
wife and
say,
children has
by
no longer
paving the way
anything
for
in
more
common with the
extensive
bourgeois
and
family
more
relations.
destructive crises,
Modern industrial
and by
labor,
diminishing the means
modern
whereby
subjection to
crises
capital,
are prevented.
the same in England as in
The
France,
weapons with which the
in America
bourgeoisie
as in
felled
Germany,
feudalism to the
has
ground
stripped him
are
of
now
any
turned
trace
against
of
the
national
bourgeoisie
character.
itself.
Law, morality,
But not only
religion
has the
are to
bourgeoisie
him so
forged
many
the weapons
bourgeois
that bring
prejudices
death to itself,
behind
it
which
has also
lurk in
called into
ambush just
existence
as many
the
bourgeois
men who are to
interests.
wield these weapons. All the
modern
preceding working
classes
class
that got the upper hand
the proletarians,
sought to fortify their already
in
acquired
proportion
status
as the
by
bourgeoisie,
subjecting society at
i.e.
large to
capital,
their
is
conditions of
developed.
appropriation.
In the same proportion
The
is the
proletarians
proletariat,
cannot become
the
masters
modern
of the
working
productive
class,
forces of
developed.
society,
A class
except
of
by
laborers
abolishing their
who
own
live only
previous
so long
mode
as
of
they find
appropriation,
work, and who
and
find
thereby
work only so
also
long as their
every
labor
other previous
increases
mode of
capital.
appropriation.
These
They
laborers,
have nothing of their
who
own
must
to
sell
secure and to
themselves
fortify.
piecemeal,
Their
are a
mission is
commodity,
to destroy
like every
all
other
previous
article of
securities
commerce,
for
and are consequently
insurances
exposed to
of
all the vicissitudes
individual
of competition, to
All
the
previous
fluctuations
historical
of the
movements
market.
were movements of minorities,
Owing to the
or in the
extensive use
interests
of machinery
minorities.
and to division
The proletarian
of labor,
movement is
the
the
work of the
self-conscious,
proletarians has lost
independent
all
movement of the
individual
immense
character,
majority,
and
in
consequently
the interests
all
of the immense
charm for the
majority.
workman. He
The
becomes an
proletariat,
appendage of the
lowest
machine,
stratum of our
and
present
it is only the
society,
most simple,
cannot
most
stir,
monotonous,
cannot
and
raise
most
itself
easily
up
acquired knack
without the
that
whole
is required of him.
superincumbent strata of
Hence,
official
the cost of
society
production
being
of a
sprung
workman
into
is
the air,
restricted, almost
though
entirely,
not in substance,
to the
yet
means
in
of
form.
subsistence that he
The struggle of
requires
the
for his
proletariat
maintenance,
with the
and for
bourgeoisie
the
is at
propagation of
first
his
a
race.
national struggle.
But the price
The
of a
proletariat
commodity,
of each country
and
must,
therefore
of course,
also of labor,
first of all,
is
settle
equal
matters
to its
with its
cost
own
of production.
bourgeoisie.
In proportion,
depicting the
therefore,
most general
as the
phases
repulsiveness of the
development
work
proletariat,
increases, the
we
wage
trace the more or less
decreases.
veiled civil
Nay,
war
more,
raging
in
within
proportion as the
existing
use
society,
of machinery
up
and
to the
division
point
of
where that
labor
war
increases,
breaks out into open
in the same
revolution,
proportion,
and where
the
the
burden
violent
of toil
overthrow of the
also
bourgeoisie
increases,
lays the
whether
foundation
by
for the
prolongation
sway
of the working
proletariat.
hours,
By
increase
hitherto,
of the work
every
exacted
form
in
of
a given
society
time,
has been based,
or by
as
increased
we have have
speed of the
already seen,
machinery, on the antagonism of oppressing modern industry has converted the little workshop but in order to oppress a class into the great factory of the industrial capitalist, under which it can masses of laborers continue crowded into the factory, are organized like soldiers in the period of serfdom, as privates of the industrial army. To membership they are placed under the command of a perfect hierarchy of officers under the yoke of feudal absolutism. Not only are they slaves of the bourgeois class into a bourgeois and of the bourgeois state, the modern laborer daily and hourly enslaved by the machine, with the progress of by the overlooker, sinks and above all and deeper below the conditions bourgeois manufacturer himself. He becomes openly this despotism, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. The more petty, the more hateful, here it becomes evident that the bourgeoisie is unfit any longer to be the ruling class of strength implied in and to impose its conditions of existence upon the more modern industry becomes an overriding law. The more is the labor of men superseded by that of women, incompetent to assure an existence to its slave no longer within his distinctive social validity, because it cannot help letting him sink into such a state are instruments of labor to feed him more instead of being fed by him. According to society can no longer live under this bourgeoisie. No sooner is the exploitation of the laborer by the manufacturer is no longer compatible so far with society that he receives his wages in cash, condition for the existence that he is set upon by the other portions of the bourgeoisie. Is the landlord, formation the shopkeeper, and augmentation of capital, etc. The condition for the lower strata of the middle wage class. Labor. The small trades labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers, the handicraftsmen, the advance of industry. All these involuntary promoter is the proletariat, replaces the isolation of the laborers. Capital does not suffice for the scale on which modern revolutionary combination and is swamped in the competition with the large. The development of modern industry, therefore, partly because their specialized skill is rendered the very foundation on which the bourgeoisie produces and appropriates is recruited from all classes. What the bourgeoisie therefore produces, the proletariat goes through various stages of development. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat the bourgeoisie are equally inevitable. First, the contest is carried on by individual laborers, Section 1. Then by the workpeople of a factory, then by the operatives of one trade, in one locality, against the individual bourgeois who directly exploits them. They direct their attacks of the not Communist Manifesto. The bourgeois conditions of production, this LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Themselves. They destroy the Communist Manifesto wares that compete by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. They smash to pieces Section 2. Machinery. Proletarians and Communists. Ablaze. They seek to restore by force. In what relation do the Communists stand to the Proletarians as a whole? The Communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. Scattered over the They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. If anywhere they do not set up any sectarian principles of their own, by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The Communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. Its own political ends, in the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, and they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. Their enemies. But the enemies of their enemies, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the whole historical movement is concentrated in the hands of the bourgeoisie. Therefore, are on the one hand, every victory so obtained, the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. But with the development of industry, that section which pushes forward all others. Number. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement are more and more equalized. The immediate aim of the communist is the same as that of all the other proletarian parties, and nearly everywhere formation of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeois supremacy among the bourgeois, conquest of political power by the proletariat, make the wages of the workers. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely
collisions
express,
between
in general
individual
terms,
workmen and
actual
individual
relations
bourgeois
springing
take
from an
more and
existing
more the
class
character
struggle,
of collisions
from a
between
historical
two
movement going
classes.
on under our very
Thereupon,
eyes.
the workers begin to
The
form
abolition of existing
combinations,
property relations
trade
is not at
unions,
all a
against
distinctive
the
feature
bourgeois.
of communism.
They club together in order
All
to keep
property
up the rate
relations
of
in the
wages.
past have
They've
continually
found
been subject to
permanent
historical
associations
change
in order to
consequent
make
upon the
provision
change in
beforehand
historical
for
conditions.
these occasional revolts.
The French
Here
Revolution,
and there,
for
the
example,
contest breaks out
abolished
into
feudal
riots.
property in favor of
Now
bourgeois
and then, the workers
property.
are victorious.
The distinguishing
only for
feature
a
of
time.
communism is not
The
the
real fruit of
abolition
their
of
battle
property
lies,
generally,
not in
but
the
the
immediate
abolition
result,
of bourgeois property.
but in the ever-expanding
But modern
union of the
bourgeois
workers.
private property is
This
the
union
final
is
and
helped
most
on by
complete
the improved
expression
means of
of the
communication
system of
that are
producing
created
and
by modern
appropriating
industry,
products,
and that
that
place
is based
the
on
workers of
class
different
antagonisms
localities in
on the
contact with one
exploitation
another.
of the many
It
by
was
the
just
few.
this contact that was
In
needed
this
to
sense, the
centralize
theory of the
numerous
communists
local
may be
struggles,
summed up in a
all of the
single
same
sentence:
character,
abolition
into
of
one
private
national
property.
struggle between classes.
We communists
But
have been
every class
reproached with the
struggle
desire
is
of
a
abolishing the
political
right
struggle,
of personally
and that
acquiring
union,
property
to
as the
attain
fruit
which
of a
the
man's
burghers
own
of the
labor,
Middle Ages,
which
with their
property is
miserable
alleged to be the
highways,
groundwork of all
required
personal
centuries.
freedom,
The
activity,
modern proletarians,
and independence.
thanks to railways,
Hard-won,
achieve in a few
self-acquired,
years.
self-earned property.
This organization
Do
of the
you mean the
proletarians
property of
into
the
a
petty
class,
artisan
and
of the small
consequently into
peasant,
a political
a form
party,
of property
is
that
continually
preceded the
being
bourgeois
upset
form?
again by the competition
There is no
between
need
the
to
workers
abolish that.
themselves.
The development
But
of
it ever
industry
rises
has
up
to a
again,
great extent already
stronger,
destroyed it,
firmer,
and is still
mightier.
destroying it daily.
It compels legislative
Or, do
recognition
you mean
of particular
modern bourgeois
interests
private
of
property?
the workers by taking
But does
advantage
wage
of the
labor
divisions
create
among
any
the
property
bourgeoisie
for the laborer?
itself.
Not
Thus, the
a
10
bit.
hours bill in England
It
was
creates
carried.
capital, i.e.,
Altogether,
that
collisions
kind of
between the
property which
classes of the
exploits
old
wage
society
labor,
further,
and which
in
cannot
many ways,
increase except
the
upon
course of
condition of
development
begetting
of
a
the
new supply of
proletariat.
wage labor for
The
fresh
bourgeoisie finds
exploitation.
itself involved in a constant
Property
battle.
in its present
At
form
first with the
is based on the
aristocracy,
antagonism
later
of
on
capital
with
and
those
wage labor.
portions of the bourgeoisie
Let us
itself,
examine both
whose
sides
interests
of
have
this
become
antagonism.
antagonistic to the progress of industry.
To be a
At
capitalist
all times,
is
with
to
the
have not
bourgeoisie
only a
of foreign
purely
countries.
personal but a social
in all
status
these
in
battles,
production.
it sees itself
Capital
compelled
is
to
a collective
appeal to
product,
the proletariat,
and only by the
to
united
ask for
action
its
of
help,
many members,
and thus
nay,
to
in the
drag
last
it into
resort,
the political
only by the
arena.
united action
The
of
bourgeoisie
all members
itself,
of society
therefore,
can it be
supplies
set
the
in motion.
proletariat with its own instruments
Capital
of
is,
political
therefore,
and
not a
general
personal,
education.
it is a social
In other
power.
words, it furnishes
When,
the
therefore,
proletariat with
capital
weapons
is
for
converted
fighting
into
the
common
bourgeoisie.
property, into the property
Further,
of all
as we have
members of
already
society,
seen,
personal
entire
property
sections
is
of the
not
ruling
thereby
classes
transformed
are,
into
by
social
the
property.
advance of industry,
It is only the social
precipitated
character
into the
of the property
proletariat,
that is changed,
or are at least
it
threatened
loses
in their
its
new
class
conditions of
character.
existence.
Let
These
us
also
now
supply
take
the
wage labor.
proletariat with fresh elements of
The average
enlightenment
price of
and
wage
progress.
labor is the minimum wage,
Finally,
i.e.,
in times
that
when the class
quantum of the
struggle
means of
nears the
subsistence
decisive
which is
hour,
absolutely
the process
requisite
of
in bare
dissolution going
existence
on
as a
within the
laborer.
ruling class.
What,
In
therefore,
fact,
the
within the
wage
whole
laborer
range of
appropriates
society,
by means of his
assumes
labor
such a
merely
violent,
suffices
glaring
to prolong
character
and
that
reproduce
a small
bare
section of the
existence.
ruling class cuts
We by
itself
no means
adrift
intend to
and
abolish
joins
this
the
personal
revolutionary
appropriation of the
class,
products of
the
labor,
class that holds the
an
future in its
appropriation that is
hands.
made for the maintenance
Just
and
as,
reproduction of
therefore,
human
at
life,
an earlier period,
and that leaves
a
no
section of the
surplus
nobility
wherewith to
went
command
over
the
to the
labor of others.
bourgeoisie.
All
So
that we
now
want to
a
do
portion
away
of the
with
bourgeoisie
is the
goes over
miserable
to the
character of this
proletariat,
appropriation,
and in particular,
under which the laborer
a portion
lives
of the
merely to
bourgeois
increase capital,
ideologists
and is
who
allowed
have
to
raised
live only
themselves to the
insofar
level
as
of
the interest of the
comprehending
ruling
theoretically
class
the
requires it.
historical movement
In
as a
bourgeois
whole.
society, living labor
Of
is
all
but a
the
means to
classes
increase
that stand
accumulated
face to
labor.
face with the bourgeoisie
In
today,
communist society,
the proletariat
accumulated labor
alone
is but a
is
means
a
to
really
widen,
revolutionary
to
class.
enrich, to
the
promote
other
the
classes
existence of the
decay and
laborer.
finally disappear in the face
In
of modern
bourgeois
industry.
society, therefore,
The proletariat
the past
is its
dominates
special
the
and
present.
essential product.
In communist society,
The lower
the
middle
present
class
dominates the past.
the small manufacturer,
In bourgeois
the
society,
shopkeeper, the
capital is
artisan,
independent
the
and
peasant,
has individuality,
all these fight
while the
against
living
bourgeoisie
person is dependent
to save from
and has
extinction
no
their
individuality.
existence as fractions of the
And
middle
the
class.
abolition of this state of
They are
things is
therefore
called by
not
the bourgeois
revolutionary, but
abolition of
conservative.
individuality
Nay,
and
more,
freedom.
they are reactionary,
And rightly so.
They try to roll
the
back
abolition
the wheel
of
of
bourgeois
history.
individuality,
If by
bourgeois
chance they are
independence,
revolutionary,
and bourgeois
they are
freedom
so
is
only in view of
undoubtedly
their
aimed at.
impending transfer into the
By
proletariat.
freedom is meant, under
They
the
thus
present
defend
bourgeois conditions
not
of
their
production,
present, but their
free
future
trade,
interests.
free selling, and
They
buying.
desert their own standpoint
But if
to
selling
place
and buying
themselves at that of
disappears,
the
free
proletariat.
selling and buying disappears also.
The dangerous class,
This talk
the
about
social
free selling
scum,
and buying,
that
and
passively
all the other
rotting mass
brave
thrown off
words
by
of
the
our
lowest layers
bourgeoisie
of old
about
society,
freedom in general,
may,
have a
here and
meaning,
there,
if any,
be swept
only
into the
in
movement by a
contrast with
proletarian
restricted selling
revolution.
and buying,
Its
with the
conditions of
fettered
life, however,
traders of the Middle
prepare it
Ages,
far more
but
for
have
the
no
part of a
meaning when
bribed
opposed to the
tool of
communistic
reactionary
abolition
intrigue.
of buying and selling,
In the
of the
conditions
bourgeois
of the
conditions of
proletariat,
production,
those
and
of
of the
old
bourgeoisie
society
itself.
at large are already
You are
virtually
horrified
swamped.
at our intending to do
The
away with
proletarian
private
is
property.
without property.
But in your
His
existing
relation
society,
to his wife and children
private
has
property
no
is
longer
already
anything
done
in
away
common
with
the
for
bourgeois
9/10 of the
family
population.
Modern
Its existence
industrial
for the
labor,
few is solely
modern
due to its
subjection
non-existence
capital,
in the
the
hands
same
of those
in England as in
9/10.
France.
You
in
reproach
America,
us,
as in
therefore, with
Germany,
intending to do
has
away with a
stripped him
form of
of any
property,
trace of
the
national
necessary
character.
condition for whose
Law,
existence
morality,
is the
religion
non-existence of
are to
any
him so
property
many
for the immense
bourgeois
majority of
prejudices,
society.
behind
In
which
one
lurk
word,
in
you
ambush
reproach
just as
us
many
with intending to
bourgeois
do away with
interests.
your property.
All the preceding classes
Precisely
that
so.
got the upper hand
That is just
sought
what we
to
intend.
fortify their already acquired
From the moment
status
when labor
by
can no longer be
subjecting
converted
society
into
at large
capital,
to their
money,
conditions
or
of
rent,
appropriation.
into a social power
The
capable of
proletarians
being
cannot become
monopolized,
masters of the productive
i.e.,
forces of
from
society,
the moment when individual
except
property
by
can no
abolishing
longer
their
be
own previous
transformed
mode
into
of
bourgeois
appropriation,
property,
and
into
thereby
capital.
also
From that
every
moment,
other
you
previous
say,
mode of appropriation.
individuality
They
vanishes.
have nothing of their own to secure and to fortify.
You must therefore confess
Their
that
mission
by
is to
individual
destroy
you
all
mean
previous
no other person
securities
than the
for
bourgeois,
and
than the
insurances
middle-class
of
owner of
individual
property. This person must
All
indeed be
previous
swept out of
historical
the way
movements were
and made
movements of
impossible.
minorities, or in
Communism
the interests
deprives no
of
man of the
minorities.
power to appropriate the products
Proletarian
of
movement
society.
is the self-conscious,
All that it does is
independent
to
movement
deprive him of the
immense
power to
majority
subjugate the labor
in
of
the
others by
interests
means of
the
such
immense
appropriation.
majority. The
It has
proletariat,
been objected that
the
upon
lowest
the
stratum of our
abolition of
present
private
society,
property,
cannot
all work
stir,
will cease,
cannot raise itself
and universal
up
laziness
without
will
the
overtake
whole
us.
superincumbent
According
strata
to
of
this,
official
bourgeois
society
society
being
ought
sprung
long
into
ago
the air,
to have gone to the
though
dogs
not in
through sheer
substance,
idleness.
yet in form.
For those of
The
its
struggle
members
of the
who work
proletariat
acquire
with the
nothing,
bourgeoisie
and
is
those
at
who
first
acquire
a national
anything do
struggle.
not work.
The
The whole
proletariat
of this
each country
objection is
must,
but
of
another
course,
expression of the
first of all,
tautology
settle matters with
that
its
there
own
can no
bourgeoisie.
longer be any wage labor
In
when there
depicting
is
the
no
most
longer
general
any
phases
capital.
of the development of the proletariat,
All objections
we
urged
trace
against
the
the
more or less
communistic mode of
veiled civil
producing
war
and appropriating
raging
material
within
products
existing society
have, in the
up
same
to the
way,
point where that
been
war
urged
breaks out
against the
into open
communistic
revolution,
modes of producing
and where
and
the violent
appropriating
overthrow
intellectual
of the bourgeoisie
products.
lays the
Just
foundation
as,
for the sway
to the
of
bourgeois,
the proletariat.
the disappearance of class
Hitherto,
property is the
every form of
disappearance of
society
production
has been
itself.
based,
So
as
the
we have
disappearance of
already
class
seen,
culture
on
is
the
to him identical
antagonism
with
of
the
oppressing and
disappearance of
oppressed
all
classes.
cultures.
But
That
in order
culture,
to
the
oppress
loss
a
of which he
class,
laments,
certain
is for the
conditions must be
enormous
assured
majority
to it,
a mere
under
training
which
to
it
act
can
as a
at
machine.
least continue its
But
slavish
don't
existence.
wrangle with us so long as you
The serf,
apply
in the period
to our
of serfdom,
intended abolition of
raised
bourgeois
himself
property
to membership
the
in the
standard
commune,
of your
just
bourgeois
as the
notions
petty
of
bourgeois,
freedom, culture,
under the
law,
yoke of feudal
etc.
absolutism,
Your very ideas
managed
are
to
but the
develop
outgrowth of
into
the
a
conditions
bourgeois.
of your bourgeois production
Modern
and
laborer,
bourgeois
on the
property.
contrary, instead
Just
of
as your
rising with the progress
jurisprudence
of
is
industry,
but the will of your
sinks
class
deeper and
made
deeper
into a law
below
for
the conditions
all,
of existence
a will
of his own
whose
class.
essential character and
He becomes
direction
a
are
pauper,
determined by the
and
economical
pauperism
conditions
develops
of
more
existence
rapidly
of your
than
class.
population and wealth.
The selfish
And here it
misconception that
becomes
induces
evident
you to
that the
transform into
bourgeoisie is
eternal laws
unfit
of
any
nature
longer
and
to
of
be
reason,
the ruling
the
class
social
in
forms
society,
springing from
and
your
to
present
impose
mode
its
of production
conditions of
and form of
existence
property,
upon society
historical
as an
relations that
overriding
rise
law.
and disappear in the
It is
progress of
unfit to
production.
rule because it is
This
incompetent
misconception
to
you
assure
share
an
with every
existence to
ruling
its
class that
slave
has
within
preceded
his
you.
slavery.
What you
Because
see
it
clearly
cannot
in the
help
case
letting
of
him sink
ancient
into such a
property,
state
what you
that it
admit in
has
the
to
case of
feed him
feudal property,
instead of being fed
you
by
are,
him.
of course, forbidden to
Society
admit
can
in
no
the case
longer
of your your own
under this
bourgeois form of
bourgeoisie.
property.
In other words,
Abolition
its
of the
existence
family
is no longer compatible
Even the most
with
radical
society.
flare up at this
The
infamous
essential
proposal of the
condition for the
communists.
existence
And
and
on
for
what
the sway of
foundation
the
is the
bourgeois
present
class
family, the
is
bourgeois
the formation
family,
and
based
augmentation of
on
capital.
capital, on
The
private
condition
gain,
for capital
In its completely developed form, this family exists
rests
only among the
exclusively on
bourgeoisie.
competition between the
But
laborers.
the state of things finds
The
its
advance of
complement in the
industry,
practical absence
whose
of the family
involuntary
among the
promoter is the
proletarians,
bourgeoisie,
and in public
replaces the
prostitution.
isolation of the laborers.
The bourgeois family
due to
will vanish
competition
as a matter of
by their
course when its
revolutionary
complement
combination
vanishes,
due
and
to
both will vanish
association.
with the vanishing of
The
capital.
development of modern industry,
Do you
therefore,
charge us with
cuts
wanting
from
to
under
stop
its
the
feet the very
exploitation of
foundation
children
on which
by
the
their
bourgeoisie
parents?
produces
This crime
and
we
appropriates
plead
products?
guilty.
What the
But,
bourgeoisie
you will
therefore
say,
produces,
we destroy the most
above all,
hallowed of relations
is its
when we
own
replace home
gravediggers.
education by
Its
social.
fall and the victory
And
of the
your
proletariat
education
are equally
Is
inevitable.
not that also social, and determined
End of
by the
section
social
1.
conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools, etc.? The Communists have not invented the intervention of society
Section
in
2 of
education.
the Communist
They
Manifesto.
do but seek to alter the character
This
of
LibriVox
that
recording
intervention
is in the
and
public
to
domain.
rescue education from the
The
influence
Communist
of the ruling
Manifesto
class.
by Karl Marx
The bourgeois
and Friedrich
claptrap
Engels.
about the family
Section
and
2.
education, about
Proletarians
the hallowed
and Communists.
correlation of parent and child, becomes
In what
all
relation
the
do the
more
Communists
disgusting
stand to the
the more,
Proletarians
by
as a
the
whole?
action of modern
The
industry,
Communists do not
all
form a
family
separate
ties
party
among the
opposed to other
proletarians are
working
torn
class
asunder,
parties.
and
They
their
have no
children
interests
transformed into
separate and
simple
apart from
articles
those of the
commerce
proletariat as
and
a whole.
instruments of labor.
They do not set up any sectarian principles of their
would
own
introduce
by which
community
to
of
shape
women,
and mold the
screams the whole
proletarian movement.
bourgeoisie in chorus.
The Communists are
The bourgeois
distinguished from the
sees in
other
his
working
wife
class
a
parties
mere
by this
instrument of
only.
production.
1.
He hears
In the
that
national
instruments
struggles of the
production are to be
proletarians of the different
exploited in
countries,
common,
they
and
point out
naturally
and
can
bring
come
to the
no other
front the common
conclusion
interests
than that
of
the
the
lot of
entire
being common
proletariat,
to all
independently
will likewise
of all
fall to the women.
nationality.
He
2.
has not even a suspicion
In the various
that the real
stages of
point is
development
to do
which the
away
struggle
with the
of the
status
working
women
class
as
against
mere
the
instruments of
bourgeoisie has to
production.
pass through,
For the
they
rest,
always and
nothing
everywhere
is more
represent the
ridiculous
interests
than the
of the movement
virtuous
as a whole.
indignation of our bourgeois
The Communists,
at the
therefore,
community of
are
women
on the one
which,
hand,
they pretend,
practically, the
is
most
to be
advanced
openly
and
resolute
resolute
section of the
established by the
working
Communist
class
parties of every country.
The Communists have
That
no
section
need
which
to
pushes
introduce
forward all
community
others.
of women.
On the other
It has
hand,
existed
theoretically,
almost from time
they have
immemorial.
over the great mass of the
Our
proletariat
bourgeois,
the advantage
not
of
content
clearly
with having the
understanding
wives
the
and
line of
daughters of
march,
their
the
proletarians
conditions,
at their
and the
disposal,
ultimate general
not to
results
speak
of the
common
proletarian movement.
prostitutes, take the
The
greatest
immediate
pleasure
aim
in
of the
seducing
Communists
each other's
is the
wives.
same as that of all the
Bourgeois
other
marriage is
proletarian
in
parties.
reality a system
Formation
of
of the
wives in
proletariat
common,
into a class,
and thus, at the most,
overthrow of the
what
bourgeois
communists
supremacy,
might possibly be reproached
conquest
with
of political power
is that they
by the
desire to
proletariat.
introduce, in
The
substitution
theoretical
for a
conclusions of the
hypocritically
Communists
concealed
are in
and
no way
openly
based on
legalized
ideas or
community of
principles
women.
that have been invented
For the
or
rest,
discovered
it is self-evident
by this
that
or
the
that
abolition
would
of the
be
present
universal
system of
reformer.
production
They
must
merely
bring with it
express,
the
in
abolition
general
of the
terms,
community of women
actual
springing from
relations
that system,
springing from an
i.e.,
existing class
of
struggle,
prostitution,
from a
both
historical
public and
movement
private.
going on under our
The
very
Communists
eyes.
are further
The
reproached
abolition
with
of
desiring
existing
to abolish
property relations
countries
is
and
not at all a
nationality.
distinctive feature
The
of
working men
communism.
have no country.
All property
We cannot
relations
take
in
from
the
them
past
what they
have
have not
continually been
got.
subject to historical
Since the
change,
proletariat must
consequent
first of
upon
all
the change
acquire
in historical
political conditions,
supremacy.
must
The
rise
French
to be the
Revolution,
leading
for
class
example,
of the nation,
abolished
must
feudal property in
constitute
favor
itself
of
the
bourgeois
nation.
property.
It is, so far,
The distinguishing
itself
feature of
national,
communism
though
is
not
not
in the
the
bourgeois
abolition
sense
of
of the
property
word.
generally,
National
but the abolition
differences
of
and
bourgeois
antagonisms
property.
between peoples
But modern
are daily
bourgeois
more
private
and more
property
vanishing,
is the final and
owing
most
to the
complete
development of the
expression
bourgeoisie,
of the system
to
of
freedom of
producing and
commerce,
appropriating
to the world
products,
market,
that
to
is based on
uniformity
class
and the mode of
antagonisms
production, and in the
on the
conditions of
exploitation
life
of the
corresponding
many
thereto.
by the few.
The
In
supremacy
this
of the
sense,
proletariat
the theory
will
of the
cause them
communists
to
may be
vanish
summed up
still
in a
faster.
single sentence:
United
abolition
action
of private
of the leading
property.
civilized countries at
We
least
communists have
is
been
one of the
reproached
first
with the
conditions
desire
for
of
the
abolishing the
emancipation
right
of the
of personally
proletariat,
acquiring property
in
as the fruit
proportion
of a
as the
man's own labor,
exploitation of one
which
individual
property is
by
alleged
another
to be the
is put an
groundwork
end
of
to.
all personal freedom,
The exploitation of
activity,
one nation
and
by
independence
another
will also be put
hard-won,
an end to.
self-acquired,
In
self-earned
proportion as
property.
the antagonism
Do
between
you mean the
classes
property
within
of the
nation
petty
vanishes,
artisan,
the
and of the
hostility
small
of one
peasant,
nation to another
a
will
form of
come to an
property
end?
that preceded the bourgeois
The
form?
charges against
There
communism
is no
made
need
from
to
a
abolish
religious,
that.
a philosophical,
The development of industry
and
has, to a
generally
great
from an
extent, already
ideological
destroyed
standpoint,
it, and
are
is
not
still
deserving
destroying
of
it
serious
daily.
examination.
Or
Do
does
you
it
mean
require
modern
deep
bourgeois
intuition
private
to
property.
comprehend that man's
But does wage
ideas,
labor create
views,
any
and
property
conceptions,
for the laborer?
in one word,
Not
man's
a bit.
consciousness,
It creates
changes with
capital,
every change in the
i.e.,
conditions of his
that
material
kind of property
existence,
which exploits
in his
wage
social
labor,
relations, and in
which
his
cannot
social
increase
life.
except upon condition
What
of
else
begetting
does the
a new
history of
supply of
ideas
wage
prove?
labor for fresh
Then that intellectual
exploitation.
production changes
Property
its character
in its present
in proportion
form
as
is
material
based on the
production is
antagonism
changed.
of capital and
The
wage
ruling
labor.
ideas of each age
Let us examine
have ever
both
been the
sides
ideas
of
of
this
its ruling
antagonism.
class.
To
When
be a
people speak of
capitalist
ideas that
is to have not only a
society,
purely personal,
they do but
a
express
social
the fact
status in
that
production.
within the old society,
Capital is a
the
collective
elements
product,
of a new one have
and
been
only by the
created,
united action
and
of
that the
many
dissolution
members,
of the old
nay,
ideas
in the last
keeps
resort,
even pace
only
with
by
the
the
dissolution
united
of the
action
old
of
conditions
all
of
members of
existence.
society can it be set
When
in
the
motion.
ancient world was in its last
Capital
throes,
is, therefore,
the
not a
ancient
personal,
religions were
it is
overcome
a
by
social
Christianity.
When
Christian
therefore,
ideas
capital
succumbed
is
in the
converted
18th
into
century
common
to
property,
rationalist ideas,
into the property of
feudal
all
society
members of
fought
society,
its death battle with
personal
the then
property is not
revolutionary
thereby
bourgeoisie.
transformed into social
The ideas
property.
of religious liberty
It
and
is only
freedom
the
of
social
conscience
character
merely
of
gave
the property
expression
that
to the
is
sway of
changed.
free
It
competition
loses
within
its
the
class
domain
character.
of knowledge.
Let us now take
Undoubtedly,
wage labor.
it will be said,
The
religious,
average price
moral,
of wage labor is
philosophical,
the minimum
and judicial
wage,
ideas
i.e.,
have been
that
modified
quantum
in the
of the
course
means of
historical
subsistence,
development.
which is
But
absolutely
religion,
requisite in bare
morality,
existence as a
philosophy,
laborer.
political science, and
What
law
therefore the wage
constantly
laborer
survive this
appropriates by
change.
means of his labor
There
merely
are,
suffices
besides,
to
eternal
prolong and
truths,
reproduce a
such
bare
as freedom,
existence.
justice, etc.,
We by no
that are
means
common to
intend to
all states of
abolish this
society.
personal appropriation
But
of the products
communism
of labor,
abolishes
an
eternal
appropriation
truths.
that is
It
made for the
abolishes all
maintenance and
religion
reproduction
and all
of human
morality,
life,
instead of
and that leaves no
constituting them on a
surplus
new
wherewith
basis.
to command the
It
labor of
therefore
others.
acts in contradiction
All
to
that
all
we want
past
to do away
historical
with
experience.
is the miserable character of this
What does this
appropriation,
accusation
under which the
reduce
laborer
itself
lives
to?
merely to
The
increase
history of
capital,
all past
and is
society
allowed
has
to live
consisted
only
in the
insofar
development
as
of
the
class
interest of the
antagonisms,
ruling class requires it.
antagonisms that assumed
In
different
bourgeois
forms
society,
at different epochs.
living labor is but a
But
means to
whatever
increase
form they may have
accumulated
taken,
labor.
one fact is
In
common to
communist
all
society,
past ages.
accumulated labor
These-
is but a means
the
to
exploitation
widen,
of
to
one
enrich,
part of society
to promote
by
the
the other.
existence of the laborer.
No wonder, then, that the social
bourgeois
consciousness
society,
of past
therefore,
ages,
the
despite
past
all the
dominates the
multiplicity
present.
and variety
In
it
communist
displays,
society, the
moves
present
within
dominates
certain
the
common
past.
forms
In
or general
bourgeois
ideas,
society,
which
capital
cannot
is
completely
independent and
vanish
has
except with
individuality,
the total
while the
disappearance
living
of class
person is
antagonisms.
dependent and has no
The
individuality.
communist revolution is the
And
most
the abolition
radical
of this state
rupture
of
with
things is
traditional
called by the
property
bourgeois
relations.
abolition
No
of
wonder that its
individuality
development
and
involves
freedom.
the most radical
And
rupture
rightly
with
so.
traditional ideas.
The abolition of bourgeois
But let us have
individuality,
done with the
bourgeois
bourgeois objections
independence,
to communism.
and bourgeois freedom is
We have seen
undoubtedly
above
aimed at.
that the first step in the revolution
By
by the
freedom is
working
meant,
class
under the
is
present
to
bourgeois
raise the
conditions of
proletariat to the
production,
position of
free
ruling,
trade, free
as to
selling,
win the
and
battle
buying.
of democracy.
But if selling and buying
proletariat will use its
disappears,
political
free selling and
supremacy
buying
to
disappears
wrest
also.
by degrees
All
all
talk
capital
about
from
free
the
selling and
bourgeoisie,
buying,
to
and all the other
centralize all
brave
instruments of
words of our
production in the hands
bourgeoisie
of the
about
state,
freedom in general,
i.e.,
have a
of the
meaning,
proletariat
if any,
organized as
only
the
in
ruling
contrast
class,
with restricted
and to
selling
increase
and
the
buying
total of
with the
productive
fettered
forces as
traders of the
rapidly
Middle
as
Ages,
possible.
but have no meaning when
Of course, in the
opposed to the
beginning,
communistic
this cannot be
abolition of
effected
buying and
except by
selling
means of
of the
despotic
bourgeois
inroads
conditions
on the
of
rights of
production
property,
and of the
and on the
bourgeoisie
conditions
itself.
of bourgeois production.
You are
By means of
horrified
measures,
at our
therefore,
intending to do
which
away with
appear
private
economically
property,
insufficient
but in your
and
existing
untenable,
society,
but which, in
private
the course
property
of the
is
movement,
already done away
outstrip
with for
themselves,
9/10 of the
necessitate
population.
further inroads
Its
upon the old
existence
social
for the
order,
few is solely due
and
to
are
its
unavoidable as a
non-existence
means
in
of
the hands of
entirely
those 9/10.
revolutionizing the mode of production.
You reproach us, therefore,
These
with intending
measures
to
will,
do
of
away
course,
with
be
the form
different
of
in different
property,
countries.
the necessary condition
Nevertheless,
for whose
in the most
existence
advanced
is
countries,
the
the following
non-existence
will
of
be
any
pretty
property
generally
for the
applicable.
immense majority of
1.
society.
Abolition
In
of
one
property
word,
and land,
you
and
reproach us with
application of all
intending to
rents
do
of
away
land
with
to
your
public
property.
purposes.
Precisely so.
A heavy
That is
progressive or
just what we
graduated
intend.
income tax.
From the moment
3.
when labor can no longer
Abolition
be
of
converted
all
into
right of
capital,
inheritance,
money, or rent,
4.
into a social
Confiscation
power
of the
capable of
property
being
of all
monopolized,
immigrants and rebels,
i.e., from the
5.
moment when individual
Centralization
property can
of
no longer
credit
be
in the hands of
transformed
the
into
state
bourgeois
by
property,
means of a national
into
bank
capital.
with state capital.
From that
and an
moment,
exclusive
you
monopoly.
say individuality
6.
vanishes.
Centralization of the the means of
You
communication
must
and
therefore
transport
confess that
in the
by
hands of the
individual you mean no other person
7.
than the bourgeois,
Extension
than
of
the
factories
middle-class
and
owner
instruments
of
of
property.
production owned by the
This
state,
person must
the
indeed be
bringing into
swept out of the
cultivation
way
of
and
waste
made
lands,
impossible.
and the improvement
Communism
of the soil
deprives
generally
no
in
man of the
accordance
power
with a
to
common
appropriate the
plan.
products of society.
8.
All that it does
Equal
is to
liability
deprive
of
him of
all
the
to
power to
labor.
subjugate the labor
Establishment
of
of
others by
industrial
means of
armies,
such appropriation.
especially for agriculture.
It has been objected
9.
that upon the abolition
Combination
of
of
private property,
agriculture with
all work will
manufacturing
cease,
industries,
and universal
gradual
laziness
abolition
will
of the
overtake
distinction
us.
between town and
According
country,
to this,
by a
bourgeois
more
society
equable
ought long
distribution
ago
of the
to have gone
population
to the
over the
dogs
country.
through sheer idleness.
10.
For those of its
Free
members who
education
work
for all
acquire
children
nothing,
in public schools,
and those who acquire
abolition
anything
of children's
do not work.
factory labor in its
The
present
whole of this
form,
objection is but
combination
another
of
expression
education
of the
with
tautology
industrial production,
that there can
and
no
etc.,
longer be
and
any
etc.
wage labor when there is no longer any
When
capital.
in the course of development,
all
class
objections
distinctions have
urged against the
disappeared,
communistic
and all
mode of
production has been
producing and
concentrated in the
appropriating
hands
material
of a
products
vast association
have,
of the whole
in the
nation,
same way,
the
been
public
urged
power
against
will
the
lose its
communistic
political
modes
character.
of producing and appropriating
Political power,
intellectual
properly
products,
so called,
just as
is merely
to the
the
bourgeois,
organized power
the
of one
disappearance
class
of class
for
property
oppressing
is the
another.
disappearance of
If the
production
proletariat
itself.
during its
So the
contest with the
disappearance of
bourgeoisie
class
is
culture
compelled
is to him
by the
identical
force of
with the
circumstances
disappearance of all
to organize
culture.
itself as a class.
That culture, the
If,
loss of which
by
he
means
laments,
of a revolution,
is for the
it makes
enormous
itself
majority
the ruling
a
class,
mere training to
and
act
as
as
such,
a machine.
sweeps away by force the
But
old
don't
conditions
wrangle
of
with us
production,
so long as you
then
apply
it will,
to
along
our
with these
intended
conditions,
abolition of
have
bourgeois
swept away the
property,
conditions for the
standard
existence
of
of
your
class
bourgeois notions
antagonisms
of freedom,
and of classes
culture, law,
generally,
etc.
and will thereby have
Your
abolished
very
its own
ideas are but the
supremacy as a
outgrowth of the
class.
conditions of your bourgeois
In place
production
of the old
and
bourgeois
property.
society, with
Just
its
as your
classes and class
jurisprudence is but the
antagonisms,
will of your
we
class
shall have an
made into a law
association
for all,
in which the free
a
development
will
of each
whose
is the
essential
condition
character
for
and
the free
direction are
development
determined by
of
the
all.
economical conditions of existence of your class.
End of section 2.
The selfish misconception that induces you to transform into eternal laws of nature and of reason
Section
the
3
social
of the
forms
Communist
springing from your
Manifesto.
present mode of production and
This
form of
LibreVox
property,
recording is in the public
historical
domain
relations
and is
that
read by
rise and
Mark Smith
disappear
of
in the
Simpsonville,
progress of
South Carolina.
production. This misconception
The
you share
Communist
with every
Manifesto
ruling class that
by
has
Karl
preceded
Marx
you.
and Friedrich Engels.
What you see clearly in the case
Section
of ancient
3,
property,
Socialist and
what you
Communist
admit
literature.
in the case of feudal property,
1.
you are of course
Reactionary
forbidden to
socialism.
admit in the case of your own
A.
bourgeois form of
Feudal
property.
socialism.
Abolition of the family.
Owing to their historical
even
position,
the most
it
radical
became the
flare up
vocation
at
of
this
the
infamous
aristocracies
proposal
of
of the
France and
communists.
England to write pamphlets
On what
against
foundation
modern
is the
bourgeois
present
society.
family, the bourgeois
In the French
family,
Revolution of
based
July
on
1830
capital,
and
on
in the
private
English Reform
gain,
agitation,
in its completely
these
developed
aristocracies
form, this
again
family
succumbed to
exists
the
only
hateful
among the
upstart.
bourgeoisie.
Thenceforth,
But
a
the
serious
state of
political
things finds its
contest was
complement in the
altogether out
practical
of the
absence
question.
of the family
A
among the
literary battle
proletarians,
alone remained
and
possible.
in public prostitution.
But even in the domain of
the bourgeois
literature,
family
the
will
old
vanish
cries of the
as a matter of
Restoration
course
period
when
had
its
become
complement
impossible.
and both will vanish
In order
with the
to
vanishing
arouse
of
sympathy,
capital.
the aristocracy
Do
were
you charge
obliged to
us
lose
with wanting
sight,
to stop the
apparently,
exploitation
of their own
of children
interests,
by their
and to
parents?
formulate their
To this
indictment
crime
against the
we plead
bourgeoisie in
guilty.
the interest of the exploited
But,
working
you will
class
say,
alone.
we destroy the most
Thus
hallowed
the
of
aristocracy
relations
took
when
their
we replace
revenge
home
by singing
education by
lampoons
social.
on their new master,
And your
whispering in his
education
ears sinister
is not that
prophecies of
also
coming
social
catastrophe.
and determined by the social
In this way
conditions
arose
under
feudal
which you
socialism,
educate,
half
by the
lamentation,
intervention, direct
half
or
lampoon,
indirect, of society,
half echo of the
by means of
past,
schools,
half
etc.
menace of the future.
The communists
At
have
times,
not invented
by
the
its bitter,
intervention of
witty,
society
and incisive
education.
criticism,
They do
striking
but
the
seek
bourgeoisie
to
to
alter
the very
character
heart's
of that
core,
intervention,
but
and
always
to rescue
ludicrous in its
education
effect,
from the
through
influence
total
of the ruling
incapacity
class.
to comprehend the march
The
of
bourgeois
modern
claptrap
history.
about the family and education,
The aristocracy,
about the
in order to
hallowed
rally the
correlation
people
of
to
parent
them,
and child,
waved the
becomes
proletarian
all the
alms
more
bag in front
disgusting,
for a banner.
the more by the
But the
action
people,
of modern
so
industry,
often as it joined
all
them,
family
saw
ties
on
among
their
the
hindquarters
proletarians
the
are
old
torn asunder,
feudal coats of arms,
and their children
and
transformed
deserted
into
with loud
simple
and
articles of
irreverent
commerce
laughter.
and instruments
One
of
section
labor.
of the French legitimists
But you
and young
communists
England
would introduce
exhibited the
community of
spectacle
women,
in pointing
screams
out
the
that
whole
their mode of
bourgeoisie in
exploitation
chorus.
was different to that of the
The bourgeois
bourgeoisie.
sees in
The
his
feudalists
wife a
forget
mere
that they
instrument of
exploited under
production.
circumstances
He
and
hears
conditions
the
that were quite
instruments of
different
production are to be
and that are now
exploited in
antiquated.
common,
In
and
showing
naturally
that,
can come
under
to
their
no other
rule, the
conclusion
modern
than that
proletariat
the lot of
never
being
existed.
common to all
They forget
will
that the
likewise
modern
fall to the
bourgeoisie
women.
is the necessary
He has
offspring of
not
their
even
own
a
form of
suspicion that
society.
the real point is to do
For the
away
rest,
with the
so
status
little
of
do they
women as
conceal
mere
the
instruments
reactionary
of
character
production.
of their
their criticism
For the rest,
that their chief
nothing is
accusation
more
against the
ridiculous than
bourgeoisie
the
amounts
virtuous
to this:
indignation of our
that under the
bourgeois
bourgeois
at the
regime
community
a
of
class
women
is
which
being
they
developed,
pretend
which is
is to be
destined to cut
openly
up
and
root and
officially
branch the
established
old
by the
order of
communists.
society.
The communists
What they
have
upbraid
no
the
need to
bourgeoisie with
introduce
is not so
community
much
of
that it
women.
creates a
It has
proletariat
existed almost
as
from
that it
time
creates a
immemorial.
revolutionary proletariat.
Our bourgeois, not
In political
content with
practice,
having the wives
therefore,
and daughters of
they
their
join in all
proletarians at their
coercive measures
disposal,
against the working
not
class.
to speak of common
And in
prostitutes,
ordinary life,
take the
despite
greatest
their
pleasure in
highfalutin
seducing
phrases,
each other's
they stoop
wives.
to pick up the golden
Bourgeois
apples dropped
marriage
from
is
the
in
tree of
reality
industry,
a system of
and to
wives
barter
in
truth,
common,
love, and honor
thus,
for
at the
traffic
most,
in wool,
what the
beetroot
communists might
sugar,
possibly
and
be
potato
reproached
spirits.
with is that they desire
As
to
the parson
introduce,
has ever
in
gone hand in
substitution
hand
for
with the
a
landlord,
hypocritically
so has
concealed
clerical
and openly
socialism with
legalized
feudal
community
socialism.
of women.
Nothing
For the
is
rest,
easier
it
than
is
to give Christian
self-evident that the
asceticism
abolition
a
of the present
socialist
system of
tinge.
production
Has not
must bring with
Christianity
it the
declaimed
abolition
against
of the
private
community of
property,
women springing
against
from that
marriage,
system,
against the
i.e.,
state?
of prostitution,
Has it not
both
preached in the
public and
place of
private?
these charity and
The
poverty,
communists are
celibacy
further
and
reproached with desiring
mortification
to
of the
abolish
flesh,
countries and
monastic
nationality.
life and mother church?
The working men have no
Christian
country.
socialism is but
We
the holy
cannot take
water with
from them
which
what
the
they
priest
have not
consecrates the
got.
heart-burnings of the
Since
aristocrat.
the proletariat must first of all acquire political
petty
supremacy,
bourgeois socialism.
must rise to be the leading class of the nation,
The feudal
must
aristocracy was
constitute
not the
itself
only
the
class
nation.
that was ruined
It
by
is,
the
so far,
bourgeoisie,
itself
nor the
national,
only class
though
whose
not in the
conditions of
bourgeois sense
existence
of the
pined
word.
and perished in the
National
atmosphere of
differences
modern
and
bourgeois
antagonisms
society.
between peoples
The
are
medieval
daily more
burgesses
and more
and the small
vanishing,
peasant
owing to
proprietors
the development
were
of
the
the
precursors
bourgeoisie,
of the modern
to freedom
bourgeoisie.
of commerce, to the
In
world
those
market,
countries which are
to
but little
uniformity
developed,
in the mode of production,
industrially
and
and
in the
commercially,
conditions of life
these two
corresponding
classes
thereto.
still vegetate side
The
by side
supremacy
with the
of the
rising
proletariat
bourgeoisie.
will cause them to vanish
In
still
countries where
faster.
modern civilization has
United
become
action
fully
of
developed,
the leading
a new
civilized
class of
countries
petty
at
bourgeois
least
has been formed,
is one of the first
fluctuating
conditions for the
between
emancipation
proletariat
of the
and bourgeoisie,
proletariat.
and ever renewing
In
itself
proportion
as a
as the
supplementary part
exploitation
of
of one
bourgeois
individual
society.
by another is put
The
an end
individual
to,
members of this
the
class,
exploitation
however,
of one nation
are
by
being
another
constantly
will
hurled down
also
into the
be put an end
proletariat
to.
by the action of
In
competition.
proportion as the antagonism
And as
between
modern
classes
industry
within
develops,
the nation vanishes,
they even see the moment
hostility of one
approaching when they
nation to
will
another will
completely
come to an end.
disappear as an independent
The
section of
charges
modern
against
society,
communism made
to
from
be
a
replaced
religious, a
in
philosophical,
manufactures, agriculture,
and generally
and commerce
from an ideological
by
standpoint,
overlookers,
are
bailiffs,
not
and
deserving
shopmen.
of serious examination.
In countries like France,
Does it
where the
require
peasants
deep intuition
constitute
to
far more than
comprehend
half
that
of the
man's
population,
ideas,
it was
views,
natural
and
that writers who
conceptions,
sided with
in
the
one
proletariat
word,
against the
man's
bourgeoisie
consciousness,
should
changes
use
with
in their
every
criticism
change
of
in
the
the
bourgeois
conditions of his
regime
material
the
existence,
standard of the peasant
in his
and
social
petty bourgeois.
relations, and in his social
And from the
life.
standpoint of these intermediate
What else
classes,
does the history
should
of
take up
ideas
the
prove
cudgels for the working
than
class.
that intellectual production
Thus arose
changes
petty
its
bourgeois
character
socialism.
in proportion as
Sismondi
material
was the
production
head
is
of this
changed.
school, not only in
The ruling
France but
ideas
also
of
in
each
England.
age have ever
This
been
school
the
of
ideas
socialism
of its ruling
dissected with great
class.
acuteness the
When
contradictions
people
and the
speak of
conditions
ideas
of modern
that
production.
revolutionize society,
It laid bare
they
the
do but express
hypocritical
the
apologies of
fact
economists.
that within the old society,
It proved
the elements of a new
incontrovertibly
one have been
the
created,
disastrous effects of
and that the
machinery and
dissolution of the
division
old
of labor,
ideas keeps
the concentration
even pace
of
with the
capital
dissolution
and
of the
land
old
in a few
conditions of
hands,
existence.
overproduction and crises.
When the ancient
It
world
pointed
was
out
in its
the
last
inevitable
throes,
ruin of the
the
petty
ancient
bourgeois
religions were
and
overcome
peasant,
by
the
Christianity.
misery of the proletariat,
When Christian
the
ideas
anarchy and
succumbed in the
production,
18th century
the
to
crying
rationalist
inequalities
ideas,
in the
feudal
distribution of
society
wealth,
fought its death
the
battle with
industrial
the
war
then
of extermination
revolutionary
between
bourgeoisie.
nations, the
The ideas
dissolution
of
of
religious
old moral
liberty and
bonds,
freedom of conscience
of the old
merely
family
gave expression
relations,
to the
of
sway
the
of
old
free
nationalities.
competition within the domain of
In
knowledge.
its positive aims, however,
Undoubtedly,
this form
it will
of
be
socialism
said,
aspires either to
religious,
restoring the
moral,
old means of
philosophical,
production
and
of
judicial
exchange,
ideas
and
have
with
been
them the old
modified in
property
the course of
relations
historical
and the old
development.
society,
But religion,
or to cramping the
morality,
modern means of
philosophy,
production
political
and of
science,
exchange
and law
within the framework of the
constantly
old
survive
property
this
relations
change.
that have been and were
There
bound
are,
to be
besides eternal
exploded
truths,
by those
such
means.
as freedom, justice,
In either
etc.,
case, it is both
that are common to all
reactionary
states
and
of
utopian.
society. But
Its last
communism
words are
abolishes eternal
corporate
truths.
guilds for
It
manufacture,
abolishes all religion
patriarchal
and all
relations,
morality,
and agriculture.
instead of constituting them on a
Ultimately,
new basis.
when
It
stubborn
therefore acts in
historical facts had
contradiction to
dispersed all
past historical
intoxicating effects of
experience.
self-deception,
What
this
does
form of
this
socialism
accusation
ended in
reduce
a
itself
miserable
to?
fit of the blues.
The history of all past society has
C.
consisted in the development
German
of
or
class
true
antagonisms.
socialism.
Antagonisms that assume
The socialist and
different forms
communist
at different
literature of
epochs.
France
a literature
whatever
that
form they may
originated
have
under the
taken,
pressure of a
one fact is
bourgeoisie in
common to
power,
all past
and that
ages.
was the expression of the
Viz.,
struggle
the
against this
exploitation
power,
of one part
was
of
introduced
society
into
by the
Germany at a
other.
time when the
No wonder,
bourgeoisie
then,
in that
that the
country
social
had just
consciousness of
begun its
past ages,
contest with
despite all
feudal
the
absolutism.
multiplicity and variety it
German
displays,
philosophers,
moves
would-be
within certain
philosophers,
common
and
forms
beaux
or
esprits
general ideas,
eagerly seized
which
on this
cannot
literature,
completely vanish,
only
except
forgetting
with the total
that when these
disappearance of
writings
class
immigrated from
antagonisms.
France into Germany, French
The Communist
social
Revolution
conditions had
is the
not
most
immigrated
radical
along
rupture
with them.
with traditional
In
property
contact
relations.
with German social
No wonder that
conditions,
its development
this French
involves the most
literature lost
radical
all its
rupture with
immediate practical
traditional
significance
ideas.
and assumed a
But
purely
let us
literary
have done
aspect.
with the bourgeois objections
Thus,
to
to
communism.
the German philosophers of
We
the
have seen
18th
above
century,
that the
the
first
demands
step
of the
in the
first French
revolution by the
Revolution were
working
nothing
class
more than the
is to
demands
raise
of
the proletariat
practical
to the
reason
position
in
of
general,
ruling,
and the
as to
utterance
win the
of the
battle
will
of
of the
democracy.
revolutionary French
The proletariat
bourgeoisie
will use its
signified
political
in their
supremacy
eyes the
to
law
wrest
of
by
pure will,
degrees all
of will
capital
as it
from
was
the
bound to
bourgeoisie,
be, of
to
true
centralize
human will
all
generally.
instruments of production in the hands of the
The
state.
world of the German
i.e.,
literate
of
consisted
the
solely in
proletariat
bringing the new
organized
French
as the
ideas
ruling
into
class,
harmony with their
and
ancient
to increase the
philosophical
total of
conscience,
productive forces
or
as
rather,
rapidly as
in
possible.
annexing the French ideas
Of
without
course, in the
deserting their
beginning,
own philosophic
this cannot
point
be
of view.
effected except by means of
This
despotic
annexation took
inroads
place
on the
in the
rights
same
of
way
property,
in which a foreign
and on the
language is
conditions of
appropriated,
bourgeois production,
namely by
by means
translation.
of measures, therefore,
It is well
which
known
appear
how the monks
economically
wrote silly
insufficient
lives of
and
Catholic
untenable,
saints over
but
the
which, in the
manuscripts
course
on
of
which
the
the
movement,
classical works of
outstrip
ancient
themselves,
heathendom had been
necessitate
written.
further inroads
The
upon
German
the old
literate
social
reversed
order,
this process with
and
the
are
profane French
unavoidable as a
literature.
means of entirely
They wrote their
revolutionizing
philosophical
the mode of
nonsense
production.
beneath the French original.
These measures will, of
For
course,
instance,
be different in
beneath the
different
French
countries.
criticism of the economic
Nevertheless,
functions
in the
of
most
money,
advanced countries,
they
the
wrote
following
alienation
will be
of
pretty generally
humanity,
applicable.
and beneath the French
1.
criticism of the bourgeois
Abolition of
state, they
property
wrote
in land, and
dethronement
application
of
of
the
all
category
rents
of the
land
general,
to public
and
purposes.
so forth.
2.
The introduction
Heavy
of these
progressive or
philosophical phrases
graduated
at the
income
back of the
tax.
French historical
3.
criticisms they dubbed
Abolition of all right
philosophy
of
of action,
inheritance.
true socialism,
4.
German
Confiscation
science
of
of
the property
socialism,
of all emigrants
philosophical
and rebels.
foundation of socialism,
5.
and so on.
Centralization of credit in
The
the
French
hands of
socialist
the state
and communist
by means of a
literature
national
was thus
bank with state
completely
capital and an
emasculated.
exclusive monopoly.
And since it seized in the
6.
hands of the German to express the
Centralization
struggle
of
of
the means
one
of
class with the
communication
other,
and transport
he
in
felt
the hands
conscious
of
of
the
having
state.
overcome French
7.
one-sidedness,
Extension
and of representing
factories and
not
instruments
true
of
requirements,
production
but the
owned by
requirements of
state,
truth,
the bringing
not
into
the
cultivation
interests
of
of the
waste
proletariat,
lands,
but the
and the
interests of
improvement of the
human
soil
nature,
generally in
of man
accordance
in
with a common
general,
plan.
who belongs to no class,
8.
has no reality,
Equal liability
who exists
of all
only
to
in
labor.
the misty realm of
Establishment of
philosophical
industrial
fantasy.
armies, especially
This
for
German
agriculture.
socialism, which took
9.
its schoolboy task so
Combination
seriously
of
and
agriculture
solemnly,
with manufacturing
and extolled its
industries.
poor stock in
Gradual
trade in such
abolition of the
mountebank
distinction
fashion,
between town and
meanwhile
country
gradually lost
by a
its
more
pedantic
equable
innocence.
distribution of the
The
population
fight of
over
the German,
country.
and especially of the Prussian
10.
bourgeoisie,
Free education
against
for all
feudal
children in
aristocracy
public
and absolute
schools.
monarchy,
Abolition of
in other
children's
words,
factory
the
labor
liberal
in its
movement
present
became
form.
more earnest.
Combination of education
By this,
with
the
industrial
long-wished-for
production,
opportunity was
and
offered
etc.,
to
and
true
etc.
socialism of confronting the
When,
political
in the
movement
course
with
of
the socialist
development,
demands,
class distinctions
of
have
hurling the
disappeared,
traditional
and all production
anathemas
has been
against
concentrated
liberalism,
in the hands of
against
a vast
representative
association
government,
of the whole nation,
against bourgeois
the public power
competition,
will lose its
bourgeois
political
freedom of the
character.
press, bourgeois
Political
legislation,
power, properly
bourgeois
so-called,
liberty and
is
equality,
merely the
and of
organized
preaching
power
to the
of one
masses that
class
they had
for
nothing to
oppressing
gain
another.
and everything to
If the
lose by this
proletariat during
bourgeois
its
movement.
contest with the bourgeoisie is
German
compelled,
socialism
by the
forgot,
force of
in the nick of
circumstances,
time,
to
that the French
organize
criticism,
itself as a
whose
class.
silly echo it
If,
was,
by means of a
presupposed the
revolution,
existence
it
of
makes
modern
itself
bourgeois
the ruling
society,
class,
with its
and as
corresponding
such, sweeps
economic
away by
conditions of
force the old
existence
conditions of
and the
production,
political
then
constitution
it will,
adapted
along with
thereto,
these conditions,
the
have
very
swept away
things
the
whose
conditions
attainment
for
was
the
the object
existence
of the
class
pending struggle in Germany.
antagonisms and of classes
To the
generally,
absolute
and will
governments,
thereby
with
have
their
abolished
following of
its own
parsons,
supremacy as a
professors,
class.
country squires, and
In
officials,
place of the old
it served
bourgeois
as a
society,
welcome
with
scarecrow
its
against the
classes
threatening
and class
bourgeoisie.
antagonisms,
It
we
was a
shall
sweet
have an
finish after the
association
bitter
in which
pills
the
of
free
floggings
development
and
of
bullets
each
with
is
which
the
these same
condition for the
governments,
free
just
development
at that time,
of all.
closed the German working
working class risings.
End of section 2.
While this true socialism thus served the governments as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it,
Section
at the same
3
time,
of the Communist
directly
Manifesto.
represented a reactionary interest.
This LibriVox
the
recording
interest of
is
the
in
German
public domain
Philistines.
and is read by Mark
In
Smith
Germany,
of
the petty
Simpsonville, South
bourgeois
Carolina.
class, a relic of the 16th century,
The Communist
and since
Manifesto
then constantly
by Karl
cropping up
Marx
again
and
under
Friedrich
various
Engels.
forms, is the real
Section
social
3,
basis of
Socialist
the existing
and
state of
Communist
things.
literature.
To preserve this
1.
class is to
Reactionary
preserve the
socialism.
existing state of things in Germany. The
Feudal
industrial and
socialism.
political supremacy of the bourgeoisie
Owing to their
threatens
historical
it with certain
position,
destruction.
it became the vocation
on the
of
one
the
hand,
aristocracies
from the
of
concentration
France
of
and
capital,
England to write
on the
pamphlets
other,
against
from the
modern
rise of a
bourgeois
revolutionary
society.
proletariat.
In the French Revolution of
True
July
socialism appeared to
1830,
kill these two
and in the
birds
English
with one
reform
stone.
agitation,
It spread
these
like an epidemic.
aristocracies again succumbed to the
The robe
hateful
of
upstart.
speculative cobwebs,
Thenceforth,
embroidered
a serious
with flowers
political
of rhetoric,
contest was altogether
steeped in
out
the
of the
dew of
question.
sickly sentiment.
A literary battle
this
alone remained
transcendental
possible.
robe in which the German
But even in the
socialists
domain
wrapped
of
their
literature,
sorry
the
eternal
old cries
truths,
of the
all
Restoration
skin
period
and
had
bone,
become impossible.
served to wonderfully increase the
In order
sale
to
of their
arouse
goods
sympathy
amongst such
the
a public.
aristocracy were obliged
And
to
on
lose
its part,
sight,
German
apparently,
socialism
of their own
recognized
interests,
more
and
and
to formulate their
more its
indictment
own
against
calling
the
as the
bourgeoisie
bombastic
in the interest
representative
of the
petty
exploited
bourgeois
working class
Philistine.
alone. Thus
It
the
proclaimed the
aristocracy
German
took
nation
their
to be the
revenge by
model
singing
nation,
lampoons
and
on
the
their
German
new
petty
master,
Philistine
and
to be the
whispering
typical
in his
man.
ears sinister
To every
prophecies
villainous
of coming
meanness of
catastrophe.
this model man, it
In
gave
this
a
way
hidden,
arose feudal
higher,
socialism,
socialistic
half
interpretation,
lamentation, half
the exact
lampoon,
contrary of
half
its
echo
real
of the
character.
past,
It went
half
to the
menace
extreme
of the
length
future.
of directly opposing
At
the
times,
brutally
by its
destructive
bitter,
tendency
witty,
of
and
communism,
incisive criticism,
and of proclaiming
striking
its
the
supreme
bourgeoisie
and
to the
impartial
very
contempt
heart's core,
of all class struggles.
but always ludicrous
with
in
very
its
few
effects,
exceptions,
through total
all the
incapacity
so-called
to comprehend
socialist
the
and
march of
communist
modern
publications
history.
that now,
The
1847,
aristocracy, in order to
circulate
rally the
in
people
Germany,
to them,
belong
waved
to
the
the domain
proletarian
of this
alms
foul
bag in
and
front for a
enervating
banner.
literature.
But the people, so often as it joined them,
conservative
saw on
or
their
bourgeois
hindquarters the
socialism.
old feudal coats of arms,
A part
and
of the
deserted
bourgeoisie
with loud
is
and
desirous
irreverent
of
laughter.
redressing social grievances.
One section of the French
in order to secure
legitimists
the
and
continued
young
existence
England
of
exhibited
bourgeois
this
society.
spectacle. In pointing out that
To
their
this
mode of
section belong
exploitation was
economists,
different to that of the
philanthropists,
bourgeoisie,
humanitarians,
the feudalists forget that they
improvers of the
exploited
conditions
under
of
the
the working
circumstances
class,
and conditions that were quite
organizers of
different,
charity,
and that are now
members of
antiquated.
societies for the prevention
In showing
of
that,
cruelty to
under their
animals,
rule, the modern
temperance
proletariat
fanatics,
never existed.
hole and
They
corner
forget that the
reformers
modern
of every
bourgeoisie is the
imaginable
necessary
kind.
offspring of their own
This
form of socialism has, moreover,
For the rest,
been worked
so
out
little
into
do they
complete
conceal the
systems.
reactionary character
We may
of their
cite
criticism
Proudhon's
that their chief
philosophie de la
accusation
misère
against the
as an
bourgeoisie
example
amounts
of
to
this
this,
form.
that under the bourgeois
socialistic
regime,
bourgeois
a class
want
is
all the
being
advantages
developed,
of modern
which is
social
destined to
conditions
cut up root
without
and
the struggles
branch
and
the old
dangers
order of
necessarily
society.
resulting therefrom.
What they upbraid
They
the
desire
bourgeoisie
the
with
existing
is
state
not
of
so much that
society
it creates
minus
a
its
proletariat
revolutionary and
as that it
disintegrating
creates a
elements.
revolutionary
They
proletariat.
wish for a bourgeoisie without
In
a
political
proletariat.
practice,
The
therefore,
bourgeoisie
they
naturally
join in all
conceives the
coercive
world
measures
in which
against
it
the
is
working
supreme
class,
to be the best.
and in ordinary
And bourgeois
life,
socialism
despite their
develops
highfalutin
this comfortable
phrases,
conception
they stoop to
into
pick up the
various
golden
more or
apples
less
dropped from
complete
the tree of
systems.
industry,
In requiring
and
the
to barter
proletariat
truth,
to
love,
carry
and honor
such a
for
system,
traffic in wool,
and thereby to
beetroot
march
sugar,
straightway
and
into the
potato
social
spirits.
New Jerusalem, as the
It but
parson
requires
has
in
ever gone
reality
hand in hand
that the
with
proletariat
the landlord,
should remain
so
within
has
the bounds
clerical
of existing
socialism
society,
with feudal
but
socialism.
you cast away all
Nothing
its
is
hateful
easier
ideas
than to give
concerning
Christian
the bourgeoisie.
asceticism a socialist tinge.
A second and
Has
more
not
practical,
Christianity
but less
declaimed against
systematic
private
form
property,
of this socialism,
against marriage,
sought to
against the
depreciate
state?
every revolutionary
Has it not
movement
preached
in the eyes
place
of the
of
working
these
class,
charity and
by
poverty,
showing that no
celibacy
mere
and
political
mortification
reform,
of the flesh,
but only a change in the
monastic
material
life and
conditions
mother
of
church?
existence, in
Christian
economic
socialism
relations,
is but the holy
could
water
be of any
with which the
advantage
priest
to them.
consecrates the heart
By
burnings of the
changes in the
aristocrat.
material conditions of existence, this
B.
form of socialism,
bourgeois
however,
socialism.
by no means understands abolition
The
of
feudal
the bourgeois
aristocracy
relations
was
of
not the
production,
only class that
an
was
abolition
ruined by the
that can be
bourgeoisie,
effected only
nor
by
the
a
only class
revolution,
whose conditions
but
of
administrative
existence pined
reforms
and perished
based
in
on the
atmosphere
continued
of
existence
modern
of these
bourgeois
relations.
society.
Reforms,
The medieval
therefore, that
burgesses
in no
and the
respect
small
affect
peasant
the relations
proprietors
between capital
were the
and labor,
precursors of the
but
modern
at the best
bourgeoisie.
lessen the cost
In those countries
and
which are
simplify
but
the
little
administrative
developed,
work,
industrially
bourgeois
and
government.
commercially, these two
Bourgeois
classes still
socialism capitalism
vegetates side
attains
by side
adequate
with the
expression
rising bourgeoisie.
when and only when,
In
it
countries
becomes
where
a mere
modern
figure of
civilization has
speech.
become fully developed,
Free
a
trade,
new class of
for
petty
the benefit
bourgeois
of the
has
working
been formed.
class, fluctuating between
duties
proletariat
for
and
the benefit
bourgeoisie,
of the working class,
and ever renewing itself
prison
as a
reform
supplementary part
for the
of
benefit
bourgeois
of the
society.
working class.
The
This is
individual
the last
members
word
of this
and
class,
the only
however,
seriously
are
meant
being
word of
constantly
bourgeois
hurled down
socialism.
into the
It
proletariat
is summed
by
up
the
in the
action of
phrase,
competition.
"The bourgeois
And
is a
as
bourgeois."
modern industry
For the
develops,
benefit
they
of the
even
working
see the moment
class.
approaching when they will completely
3.
disappear as an
Critical
independent section of
utopian
modern
socialism
society
and
to
communism.
be replaced in manufactures.
We do not here
agriculture,
refer
and
to that
commerce,
literature
by
which, in every
overlookers,
great modern
bailiffs, and
revolution,
shopmen,
has always given voice to the
countries like
demands of the
France,
proletariat,
where the peasants
such as the
constitute
writings
far
of
more than
Babeuf
half of the
and
population. It was natural
The first
that
direct
writers who
attempts of the
sided with the
proletariat
proletariat
to attain its
against
own
the
ends
bourgeoisie
made in
should
times
use
of
in their
universal
criticism
excitement
of the bourgeois
when
regime
feudal society
the
was
standard
being
of the peasant
overthrown.
and petty bourgeois.
These attempts
And from the
necessarily
standpoint
failed,
of these
owing to the
intermediate
then
classes,
undeveloped
should
state
take
of the
up the cudgels
proletariat,
for the working
as
class,
well as to the absence
Thus
of the
arose
economic
petty
conditions
bourgeois
for its
socialism.
emancipation.
Sismondi was
Conditions
the
that
head
had
of this
yet to be
school,
produced,
not only in France,
and could be
but also
produced
in
by
England.
the impending bourgeois
This
epoch
school of
alone.
socialism dissected with great
The revolutionary
acuteness
literature
the
that
contradictions
accompanied
and the
these
conditions
first
of modern
movements of the
production.
proletariat
It
had
laid
necessarily
bare the
a
hypocritical
reactionary
apologies of
character.
economists.
It
It
inculcated
proved
universal
incontrovertibly
asceticism and
the
social leveling
disastrous
in its
effects of
crudest
machinery
form.
and division of labor.
The socialist and
concentration
communist
of
systems
capital
properly
and land
so
in a few
called,
hands,
those of St. Simon,
overproduction and
Fourier,
crises.
Owen,
It
and
pointed out
others,
the inevitable
spring into
ruin
existence
of
in
the
the
petty
early
bourgeois
undeveloped
and peasant,
period
the
described
misery of the
above,
proletariat,
of the struggle between
the anarchy
proletariat
and
and
production,
bourgeoisie,
the crying
See
inequalities
Section 1,
in the distribution
Bourgeois
of
and
wealth,
proletarians.
the industrial war
The
of
founders of these
extermination between
systems see,
nations,
indeed,
the
class
dissolution of old
antagonisms,
moral bonds,
as well as the
of
action
the old
of the
family
decomposing
relations
elements
of the
in
old
the prevailing
nationalities.
form of society.
In its
But the
positive
proletariat,
aims, however,
as yet
this
in its
form of
infancy,
socialism aspires
offers to
either
them
to
the
restoring the
spectacle of a
old
class
means of
without any
production
historical
and of
initiative,
exchange, or
and
with
any
them the
independent
old property
political movement.
relations and the old society,
Since the development of
or
class
to cramping the
antagonism
modern means
keeps
of production
even
and
pace
of
with the
exchange
development of industry,
within the framework of
the
old
economic
property
situation,
relations that
as
have
they
been
find it,
and were
does
bound to
not
be
as yet offer to
exploded
them
by
the
those
material
means.
conditions for the
In either
emancipation of the
case,
proletariat.
it is both reactionary and
They therefore
utopian.
search after a new social
Its last
science,
words are,
after new
corporate
social
guilds
laws
for
that are
manufacture,
to create these
patriarchal
conditions.
relations in agriculture.
Historical action is to yield to
Ultimately,
their personal
when
inventive
stubborn
action,
historical facts had
historically
dispersed all
created
conditions
conditions
of
of
emancipation
self-deception
to fantastic ones.
This form of
socialism
gradual,
ended in a miserable
spontaneous
fit
class
of the
organization
blues.
of the proletariat to the
See,
organization of society,
German or true
specially
socialism.
contrived by these inventors.
The socialist
Future
and
history
communist
resolves
literature
itself
of
in
France,
their eyes
a literature
into the
that
propaganda
originated
and
under
the
the pressure
practical
of a
carrying out of
bourgeoisie
their
and
social
power,
plans.
and that was the
In
expression
the formation
of the struggle
of their
against
plans,
this
they are
power,
conscious of
was
caring
introduced
chiefly for
into
the
Germany
interests of
at
the
a
working
time when the
class,
bourgeoisie
as
in
being
that
the
country
most suffering
had just
class.
begun its contest
Only
with
from the
feudal
point of view of being
absolutism.
the most suffering class
German
does the proletariat
philosophers,
exist
would-be
for them.
philosophers, and beaux
The undeveloped state of the class
eagerly
struggle,
seized on this literature,
as well as their own
only
surroundings,
forgetting that
causes
when these
socialists
writings
of this
immigrated from
kind
France
to
into
consider
Germany,
themselves far
French
superior
social
to all
conditions
class
had not immigrated
antagonisms.
along with them.
They want to improve the
In
condition of
contact
every
with
member
German
of
social
society,
conditions,
even that
this
of the
French
most
literature
favored.
lost all its
Hence,
immediate practical
they habitually
significance
appeal to
and
society
assumed
at
a purely
large
literary
without
aspect.
distinction of class.
Thus,
Nay,
to the German
by
philosophers
preference
of the
to the
18th
ruling
century,
class.
the demands
For
of
how
the First
can
French
people,
Revolution
when
were
once they
nothing more than
understand
the
their
demands
system,
of
fail
practical
to see
reason
in it the
and
best
just
possible plan
and the
of the
utterance
best
of the
possible
will of
state
the
of society?
revolutionary French bourgeoisie.
Hence, they reject all
signified in their
political,
eyes the
and
law
especially
of
all
pure
revolutionary
will, of
action.
will as it was
They
bound
wish
to
to
be,
attain their
of
ends by
true
peaceful
human will
means,
generally,
and endeavor, by small experiments,
the world of the German
necessarily
literate
doomed to
consisted
failure,
solely in bringing
and by
the
the
new
force
French
of
ideas
example,
into harmony
to
with
pave
their
the way
ancient
for the new
philosophical
social
gospel.
conscience.
Or rather,
Such
in
fantastic
annexing the
pictures
French
of future
ideas
society,
without deserting their own
painted at a
philosophic
time when the
point of view.
proletariat is still in a very
This annexation
undeveloped
took
state,
place in the same
and has
way in
but a
which a foreign
fantastic
language is
conception of its own
appropriated,
position,
namely by
correspond
translation.
with the first instinctive
It is well
yearnings
known
of that
how the
class
monks
for
wrote
a
silly
general
lives of
reconstruction
Catholic
society.
saints over the manuscripts on which
But
the
these
classical
socialist
works
and
of
communist
ancient
publications
heathendom had been
contain
written.
also a critical
The German
element.
literate reversed
They
this
attack
process
every
with the
principle
profane
of
French
existing
literature.
society.
They
Hence,
wrote their
they are full of the
philosophical
most valuable
nonsense beneath the
materials for
French
the
original.
enlightenment of the working class.
For instance, beneath the French
practical
criticism
measures
of the
proposed in
economic
them,
functions of
such
money,
as the
they
abolition
wrote
of the distinction
alienation
between
of
town and
humanity,
country,
and beneath
of
the
the
French
family,
criticism of the
of
bourgeois
the carrying
state,
on
they
of
wrote
industries for the account of
dethronement
private
of the category of
individuals,
the general,
and of the wage
so
system,
forth.
The proclamation
The introduction
of
of
social
these
harmony,
philosophical
the
phrases
conversion
at
of the
back
functions
the
of the
French
state
historical
into a mere
criticism they
superintendence
dubbed
of
philosophy
production,
of action,
all
true
these proposals
socialism,
point
German
solely to the
science of
disappearance of
socialism,
class antagonisms,
philosophical
which
foundation
were
of
at that
socialism,
time only
and
just
so on.
cropping up,
The
and
French
which,
socialist
in
and
these
communist
publications,
literature
are
was thus
recognized in their
completely
earliest,
emasculated.
indistinct, and
And
undefined
since
forms
it seized
only.
in the hands of the German
These
to express
proposals,
the struggle of
therefore,
one class
are
with
of
the
a
other,
purely
he
utopian
felt
character.
conscious of having overcome
The significance
French
of critical
one-sidedness
utopian
and of
socialism
representing
and communism
not true
bears
requirements,
an
but the
inverse
requirements
relation
of
to
truth,
historical
not
development.
the interests of the
In proportion
proletariat,
as the
but
modern class
interests
struggle
of human
develops
nature
and takes
of
definite
man in
shape,
general,
this
who belongs to
fantastic
no
standing
class,
apart from the
has no
contest,
reality,
these
who exists
fantastic
only in the
attacks on
misty
it
realm of
lose
philosophical
all practical
fantasy.
value and all
This
theoretical
German
justification.
socialism, which took its
Therefore,
schoolboy task
although
so
the originators
seriously
of
and
these
solemnly,
systems were,
and
in
extolled
many
its poor
respects,
stock in trade in
revolutionary,
such
their
mountebank
disciples
fashion,
have, in every
meanwhile
case,
gradually lost
formed
its
mere
pedantic
reactionary
innocence.
sects.
The fight of
They
the
hold
German,
fast
and
by the
especially
original
of the
views of their
Prussian
masters,
bourgeoisie, in
against
opposition to
feudal
the progressive
aristocracy
historical
and absolute
development of the
monarchy.
proletariat.
In other words,
They
the
therefore
liberal movement
endeavor,
became more
and
earnest.
that consistently,
By this,
to
the
deaden
long
class
wished for
struggle
opportunity
and to
was offered
reconcile
to
the class
true
antagonisms
socialism, of
They
confronting
still
the
dream
political
of
movement
experimental
with the socialist
realization of their
demands,
social utopias,
of hurling the traditional
of founding
anathemas
isolated
against liberalism,
phalansteres,
against
of
representative
establishing
government,
home colonies,
against bourgeois competition,
of setting up a little
bourgeois
Icaria,
freedom of the press,
duodecimo
bourgeois
editions
legislation,
of the New Jerusalem,
bourgeois liberty,
and to
equality,
realize all
and of
these
preaching
castles
to the
in the
masses
air,
that they had
they are
nothing to
compelled
gain
to appeal
and
to the
everything
feelings
to
and
lose
purses
by this
of the
bourgeois
movement. By
German
degrees, they
socialism
sink into the
forgot,
category
in the
of
nick
the
of
reactionary
time,
conservative
that the French
socialism,
criticisms,
whose
depicted
silly
above,
echo it was,
differing from these
presupposed
only by
the
more
existence of
systematic
modern
pedantry,
bourgeois society,
and by their
with its
fanatical
corresponding
and superstitious
economic
belief
conditions
in
of
the
existence
miraculous effects
and the political
of their social
constitution
science.
adapted thereto.
They therefore
The very
violently
things whose
oppose
attainment
all
was the
political
object
action
of
on
the
the
part
pending
of the
struggle
working
in
class.
Germany.
Such action,
To the
according
absolute
to them,
governments,
can
with their
only
following
result
of
from
blind
parsons,
unbelief
professors,
in the new
country
gospel.
squires, and officials.
The Owenites
It served
in
as a
England
welcome
and the
scarecrow
Fourierists
against the
in
threatening
France,
bourgeoisie,
respectively.
It
was
was
a
a
sweet
sweet finish
finish
after
and
the
the
bitter
reformists.
pills of floggings and bullets with which these same governments,
Section 4.
just at that time,
Position of the
closed the
communists
German working
in relation
class
to the
risings.
various existing opposition
While
parties.
this true socialism thus served the governments
Section
as a
2
weapon
has
for fighting
made clear
the
the
German
relations of the
bourgeoisie,
communists
it,
to the
at the same
existing
time,
working class
directly
parties,
represented
such
a
as the
reactionary
Chartists
interest,
in England,
the interest
and the
of the
agrarian
German reformers
Philistines
in America. In Germany, the
petty
communists
bourgeois
fight
class,
for the
a
attainment
relic
of the
of the
immediate
16th
aims,
century,
for the
and
enforcement
since
of the
then
momentary
constantly cropping
interests
up
of the
again
working
under various
class.
forms,
But in the
is the
movement
real
of the present,
social basis
they
of the
also
existing
represent
state of
and take
things.
care of the future
To
of that
preserve
movement.
this class
In
is
France,
to preserve the existing
communists
state of things
ally
in
themselves
Germany.
with the social
The industrial
democrats.
and political
Against the
supremacy of the
conservative and
bourgeoisie
radical bourgeoisie,
threatens it with certain destruction.
reserving, however, the right
the
to
one
take up a
hand,
critical
from the concentration
position
of
in
capital,
regard to phrases
on the
and
other,
allusions
from the rise of a
traditionally handed down
revolutionary
from the Great
proletariat.
Revolution. True socialism
In Switzerland,
appeared
they
to
support
kill
the
these two
radicals
birds with one
without
stone.
losing sight of the
It
fact that
spread
this
like an
party
epidemic.
consists of antagonistic
The
elements,
robe of speculative
partly of
cobwebs,
democratic socialists,
embroidered with
in the
flowers
French
of
sense,
rhetoric,
partly of
steeped in the
radical
dew
bourgeois.
of sickly sentiment.
In Poland, they
This
support the
transcendental
party
robe
that
in which
insists
the
on
German
an agrarian
socialists wrap
revolution
their
as
sorry
the prime
eternal
condition for
truths,
national
all skin
emancipation.
and bone,
That party
served
which
to
fomented
wonderfully
the
increase
insurrection
the
of
sale of their
Krakow
goods
in
amongst such a
1846.
public.
In
And
Germany,
on
they
its
fight
part,
with the
German
bourgeoisie whenever
socialism
it acts in a
recognized
revolutionary
more
way
and more
against
its own
the absolute
calling as the
monarchy,
bombastic
the feudal
representative
squirearchy,
of the petty
and
bourgeois
the petty
Philistine.
bourgeoisie.
But
It
they never
proclaimed the
ceased
German
for a
nation
single
to be the
instant
model nation,
to instill
and
into
the
the
German
working
petty
class
Philistine
the
to be
clearest
the
possible
typical man.
recognition of the hostile
To every
antagonism
villainous meanness
between
of this
bourgeoisie
model
and
man, it
proletariat,
gave a hidden,
in
higher,
order that the German workers
socialistic
may straightway
interpretation
use, as
the
so many
exact
weapons
contrary
against the
of its real
bourgeoisie,
character.
the
It
social
went to
and
the
political
extreme length of
conditions
directly
that the
opposing
bourgeoisie
the brutally
must
destructive
necessarily
tendency of
introduce along
communism,
with its supremacy,
and of proclaiming its
and in
supreme
order
and
that,
impartial
after the fall of
contempt
the reactionary
of all class
classes in
struggles,
Germany, with
the
very
fight
few
against the
exceptions,
bourgeoisie
all the
itself may
so-called
immediately
socialist
begin.
and communist publications
The
that
communists
socialists
now,
turn their attention
1847,
chiefly to Germany,
circulate in
because
Germany,
that country is on the
belong
eve
to
of
the
a
domain
bourgeois
of this
revolution
foul
that is
and
bound to be
enervating
carried out
literature.
under more advanced conditions of
2.
European civilization,
Conservative
and
or
with a much
bourgeois
more developed
socialism.
proletariat
than that of England
A
was
part
in
of the
17th,
bourgeoisie is
and of
desirous
France
of
in the
redressing
18th
social
century.
grievances,
And
in
because
order
the
to
bourgeois
secure
revolution
the
in
continued
Germany
existence
will
of
be
bourgeois
but the
society.
prelude to an immediately
To
following
this section
proletarian
belong
revolution.
economists,
In short,
philanthropists,
the communists
humanitarians,
everywhere
improvers
support
of the
every
conditions of the
revolutionary
working
movement
class,
against the existing
organizers
social
of
and
charity,
political order of
members of
things.
societies for the
In all
prevention
these
of
movements
cruelty
they
to
bring to the
animals,
front, as the leading
temperance
question in
fanatics,
each,
hole
the
and
property
corner
question,
reformers of
no
every
matter what its
imaginable
degree of
kind.
development at the time.
This form of socialism
Finally,
has,
they
moreover,
labor everywhere
been
for
worked
the
out
union
into
and
complete
agreement
systems.
of the democratic
We
parties
may
of all
cite
countries.
Proudhon's
The
Philosophie de la
communists
Misère
disdain to
as an
conceal
example
their
of this
views
form.
and aims.
The
They openly
socialistic
declare
bourgeois
that
want
their
all
ends
the
can be
advantages of
attained
modern
only by
social
the forcible
conditions
overthrow
without the
of all
struggles and
existing
dangers
social
necessarily
conditions.
resulting therefrom.
Let the ruling classes
They desire
tremble
the
at a
existing state of
communistic
society
revolution.
minus its
The proletarians
revolutionary
have
and
nothing to
disintegrating
lose
elements.
but their chains.
They wish for
They
a bourgeoisie
have a
without
world
a
to win.
proletariat. The
Working
bourgeoisie
men of all
naturally conceives
countries,
the world
unite.
in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism
This is the
develops
end
this
of
comfortable
the Communist
conception
Manifesto
into
by
various
Karl
more
Marx
or
and
less
Friedrich
complete systems.
Engels.
In
Thank you for
requiring
listening.
the proletariat to carry out such a system, and thereby to march straightway into the social New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the proletariat should